Corporate Conspiracies. The Untold Story of Corporate Corruption. Written by Joseph Hertz. Chapter 1. The Shadow Economy. How Corporate Power Operates Behind Closed Doors. In the gleaming towers of Manhattan, the pristine corporate campuses of Silicon Valley, and the industrial complexes scattered across the American landscape, decisions are made daily that affect millions of lives. Yet the most consequential of these decisions rarely see the light of day, occurring instead in boardrooms sealed from public scrutiny, private clubs where handshakes carry more weight than legislation, and conference calls where the real business of America unfolds away from prying eyes. The modern corporation has evolved far beyond its original conception as a legal entity designed to pool capital for specific ventures. Today's multinational corporations wield power that rivals sovereign nations, controlling vast resources, influencing government policy, and shaping public discourse through carefully orchestrated campaigns. This transformation didn't happen overnight, nor was it entirely accidental. It represents the culmination of decades of strategic maneuvering, legal manipulation, and the gradual erosion of barriers between corporate interests and public governance. At the heart of this shadow economy lies a fundamental truth that most Americans never fully grasp. The largest corporations don't merely participate in the market economy, they actively shape and control it. Through complex webs of subsidiaries, shell companies, and strategic partnerships, these entities have created a parallel economic system where traditional rules of competition, transparency, and accountability hold little sway. Consider the pharmaceutical industry, where a handful of major players control the development, production, and pricing of life-saving medications. On the surface, these companies compete vigorously for market share, funding research, developing new treatments, and marketing their products to healthcare providers. Beneath this veneer of competition, however, lies a more complex reality. Patent manipulation schemes extend monopoly periods far beyond their intended duration, while strategic acquisitions eliminate potential competitors before they can bring generic alternatives to market. The practice of evergreening exemplifies this manipulation. When a blockbuster drug nears the end of its patent protection, pharmaceutical companies employ teams of lawyers and scientists to identify minor modifications that can justify new patents. A slight change in dosage, a new delivery mechanism, or even a different coating can extend monopoly pricing for years or decades. Meanwhile, the same companies often pay generic manufacturers substantial sums to delay their competing products, a practice known as pay-for-delay that costs consumers billions annually. This shadow economy extends far beyond pharmaceuticals. In the technology sector, a small number of platforms have achieved such dominance that they effectively control the flow of information, commerce, and social interaction for billions of people worldwide. These digital monopolies didn't emerge through superior innovation alone. They resulted from aggressive acquisition strategies designed to eliminate competition before it could mature. The acquisition of potential competitors has become so routine that venture capital firms now openly discuss building companies specifically to be acquired by tech giants. This creates a perverse incentive structure where true innovation takes a backseat to developing technologies that existing monopolies might find threatening enough to purchase. The result is a stagnant technological landscape where breakthrough innovations are absorbed and often suppressed, rather than allowed to disrupt established market leaders. Financial markets represent perhaps the most sophisticated example of shadow economy manipulation. High-frequency trading firms, armed with cutting-edge technology and privileged access to market data, execute millions of transactions per second, often profiting from price discrepancies that exist for mere milliseconds. These firms argue they provide market liquidity, but critics contend they're essentially skimming profits from every transaction, imposing a hidden tax on all market participants. The 2008 financial crisis revealed the extent to which major banks had manipulated fundamental market mechanisms. The packaging and selling of subprime mortgages as investment-grade securities wasn't merely poor judgment. It represented a systematic conspiracy to shift risk from sophisticated financial institutions to unsuspecting investors and taxpayers. Internal documents reveal that bank executives knew these products were fundamentally flawed, yet continued marketing them while betting against their success. Even more troubling was the discovery that major banks had been manipulating benchmark interest rates like LIBOR, which affected trillions of dollars in financial products worldwide. This manipulation wasn't the work of rogue traders. It involved coordinated efforts across multiple institutions and required the complicity of senior management. The fines imposed for these violations, while substantial, represented a fraction of the profits generated through these illegal activities. The energy sector provides another stark example of shadow economy operations. Major oil companies possessed detailed knowledge of climate change risks decades before this information became public, yet funded extensive disinformation campaigns designed to confuse public understanding and delay regulatory action. Internal documents from companies like ExxonMobil reveal that their own scientists accurately predicted current climate trends as early as the 1970s, even as their public relations departments funded think tanks and advocacy groups that denied these same findings. This pattern of suppressing internal research while funding external denial campaigns extends beyond climate change. Tobacco companies perfected this approach in the mid-20th century, hiding evidence of their products' health risks while funding research designed to cast doubt on emerging scientific consensus. The same playbook has been employed by chemical companies facing scrutiny over toxic substances, food companies defending problematic additives, and technology companies deflecting concerns about privacy and addiction. The shadow economy operates through a complex network of intermediaries that provide plausible deniability for corporate actors. Public relations firms specialize in creating grassroots movements that are actually funded by corporate interests, a practice known as astroturfing. These fake grassroots organizations lobby for policies that benefit their corporate sponsors while claiming to represent ordinary citizens' interests. Think tanks and research institutions often serve similar functions, producing studies and reports that support predetermined conclusions favorable to their corporate funders. The veneer of academic respectability allows corporate interests to present biased research as objective analysis, influencing policy debates and public opinion without revealing the source of their funding. Professional service firms, including law firms, accounting firms, and consulting companies, serve as crucial enablers of shadow economy operations. These firms provide sophisticated legal structures that allow corporations to minimize tax obligations, hide beneficial ownership, and shield assets from potential liabilities. The same firms often advise government agencies, creating inherent conflicts of interest that serve corporate clients' interests. The revolving door between corporations and government agencies ensures that shadow economy operations rarely face serious challenges from regulators. Former government officials bring insider knowledge and valuable connections to their corporate employers, while former corporate executives carry industry perspectives into government roles. This constant circulation of personnel creates a shared worldview that prioritizes corporate interests over public welfare. Understanding the shadow economy requires recognizing that it operates according to different rules than the visible economy most Americans experience. While ordinary businesses face genuine competition, regulatory oversight, and market accountability, shadow economy participants have largely insulated themselves from these constraints. They've created a system where profits are privatized while risks are socialized, where competition is managed rather than genuine, and where public policy serves private interests. This system didn't emerge through malicious conspiracy alone. It developed through the accumulation of legal loopholes, regulatory capture, and the gradual erosion of democratic institutions. Each individual action might seem reasonable in isolation, but collectively they've created a parallel economic system that operates with minimal public oversight or accountability. The implications of this shadow economy extend far beyond economic policy. When a small number of powerful interests can shape public discourse, influence elections, and capture regulatory agencies, democratic governance itself becomes compromised. Citizens find themselves voting on choices predetermined by corporate interests, debating issues framed by corporate communication strategies, and living under laws written by corporate lobbyists. Breaking free from this shadow economy requires first understanding its scope and mechanisms. Only by recognizing how corporate power operates behind closed doors can citizens and policymakers begin to reclaim democratic control over economic policy and restore genuine competition to American markets. Chapter 2: The Web of Influence, Regulatory Capture and Political Manipulation. The fluorescent lights of congressional hearing rooms have witnessed countless examples of regulatory theater, pharmaceutical executives defending price increases that force patients to choose between medication and rent, banking officials explaining away fees that disproportionately burden low-income customers, and tech leaders offering carefully crafted non-apologies for privacy violations that expose millions of users' personal data. These public performances, broadcast on C-SPAN and dissected by news media, create an illusion of accountability while the real business of influence continues in private meetings, campaign fundraisers, and exclusive industry conferences. Regulatory capture represents one of the most sophisticated forms of corporate manipulation, transforming government agencies designed to protect public interests into advocates for the industries they're supposed to oversee. This process rarely involves crude bribery or explicit corruption. Instead, it operates through subtler mechanisms that gradually align regulatory priorities with corporate objectives. The revolving door between industry and government creates the foundation for regulatory capture. Career regulators know that challenging powerful industries might limit their future employment opportunities, while being cooperative often leads to lucrative private sector positions. This dynamic creates powerful incentives for regulators to adopt industry-friendly interpretations of their mandates, even when these interpretations conflict with public interest. Consider the relationship between pharmaceutical companies and the Food and Drug Administration. The FDA's drug approval process depends heavily on fees paid by pharmaceutical companies, creating a situation where the agency's budget relies on satisfying its supposed regulatory targets. This funding structure incentivizes faster approvals and more lenient oversight, as delayed or rejected applications reduce the agency's revenue stream. Former FDA officials regularly join pharmaceutical companies as consultants, bringing intimate knowledge of regulatory processes and personal relationships with current agency personnel. These connections prove invaluable when companies face regulatory challenges or seek approvals for new products. The same officials who once enforced regulations now help companies navigate around them, using their insider knowledge to identify loopholes and exploit ambiguities. The financial sector's relationship with banking regulators exemplifies regulatory capture on a massive scale. Major banks employ hundreds of former regulators, from mid-level examiners to former Treasury secretaries and Federal Reserve officials. These relationships create informal channels of communication that allow banks to influence regulatory decisions before they're finalized, effectively giving them veto power over policies that might constrain their activities. Banking regulators, aware that their career prospects depend partly on industry relationships, often adopt a collaborative rather than adversarial approach to oversight. They frame their role as helping banks comply with regulations rather than enforcing strict accountability, leading to negotiated settlements that impose minimal penalties for serious violations. The 2008 financial crisis revealed the extent of this regulatory capture. Despite clear evidence of widespread fraud and misconduct, federal prosecutors declined to pursue criminal charges against major banking executives, instead negotiating civil settlements that allowed companies to pay fines without admitting wrongdoing. These settlements, while generating headlines about multi-billion-dollar penalties, typically represented a small fraction of the profits generated through illegal activities. Political manipulation operates through more visible channels, but proves equally effective at protecting corporate interests. Campaign contributions, while subject to disclosure requirements and contribution limits, represent only the tip of the influence iceberg. Super PACs and dark money organizations allow unlimited corporate spending on political advocacy, often without revealing the true sources of funding. Corporate political action committees coordinate contributions to maximize their influence, ensuring that key legislators receive support from multiple industry sources. This coordination creates the appearance of broad-based support for corporate positions while obscuring the concentrated nature of business political spending. A single industry might fund dozens of seemingly independent organizations, all advocating for identical policy positions. The timing of political contributions reveals their strategic nature. Donations often spike around key votes or regulatory decisions, creating obvious quid pro quo relationships that somehow remain legal under current campaign finance laws. Companies contribute to legislators who sit on committees overseeing their industries, ensuring access to decision-makers when crucial votes approach. Lobbying expenditures dwarf campaign contributions in both scale and effectiveness. Corporate lobbyists outnumber elected officials by ratios exceeding 20-1, creating an overwhelming presence in legislative corridors. These lobbyists don't merely advocate for their clients' positions. They often write the actual legislation that lawmakers subsequently introduce. The complexity of modern policy issues gives corporate lobbyists significant advantages over public interest advocates. While citizen groups might have passionate volunteers and limited resources, corporate lobbying operations employ teams of specialists with deep technical knowledge and unlimited budgets. They can afford to hire former legislators and regulators who understand the intricacies of policy making and maintain relationships with current officials. Legislative drafting has become increasingly outsourced to corporate interests through organizations like the American Legislative Exchange Council, ALEC, which brings together corporate lobbyists and state legislators to develop model legislation. These template bills, crafted to advance corporate interests, are subsequently introduced in state legislatures across the country, often with minimal modification. The influence of ALEC and similar organizations extends beyond individual policy issues to fundamental questions about the role of government in society. Corporate-sponsored model legislation consistently favors deregulation, privatization, and reduced public oversight, advancing a coherent ideological agenda that benefits corporate interests while claiming to promote economic efficiency and individual freedom. Corporate influence operations extend beyond traditional lobbying to encompass sophisticated public relations campaigns designed to shape public opinion and create artificial grassroots support for corporate positions. These campaigns employ advanced psychological research and behavioral economics to craft messages that resonate with target audiences, often exploiting existing political divisions and cultural anxieties. AstroTurfing campaigns create the illusion of grassroots support for corporate positions by funding organizations that claim to represent ordinary citizens' interests. These fake grassroots groups often use names that suggest broad public support, such as Americans for Energy Independence or Citizens for Responsible Reform, while being funded entirely by corporate interests. Social media has amplified the effectiveness of these influence campaigns by allowing corporate interests to target specific demographics with tailored messages. Data analytics enable precise targeting of individuals based on their political views, economic circumstances, and psychological profiles, allowing corporate communicators to craft messages that exploit specific fears and desires. The sophistication of modern influence operations often makes them invisible to their targets. Citizens consuming media content may not recognize that articles, videos, and social media posts they encounter are part of coordinated campaigns funded by corporate interests. The line between authentic journalism and corporate propaganda has become increasingly blurred as traditional media outlets struggle financially and become more dependent on corporate advertising and sponsored content. Think tanks and research institutions serve as crucial nodes in corporate influence networks, producing studies and reports that provide intellectual justification for corporate positions. These organizations often present themselves as independent research institutions while receiving substantial funding from corporate sponsors with clear interests in their research conclusions. The academic veneer of think tank research allows corporate interests to present biased analysis as objective scholarship, influencing policy debates and media coverage. Journalists citing think tank studies rarely disclose their corporate funding sources, inadvertently serving as conduits for corporate messaging. Professional associations and trade groups coordinate industry-wide influence campaigns that pool resources from multiple companies while obscuring individual corporate involvement. These organizations can advocate for positions that benefit entire industries without exposing individual companies to public criticism or regulatory backlash. The web of corporate influence extends into international forums where global trade and regulatory policies are negotiated. Corporate interests participate in these negotiations through multiple channels, including official advisory committees, industry associations, and private diplomatic channels. The resulting agreements often prioritize corporate interests over democratic governance, limiting countries' abilities to regulate corporate behavior or protect public welfare. Trade agreements increasingly include investor-state dispute settlement mechanisms that allow corporations to challenge government policies in private tribunals, effectively giving corporate interests veto power over democratic decision-making. These mechanisms have been used to challenge environmental regulations, public health measures, and financial oversight, prioritizing corporate profits over public policy objectives. Understanding the web of corporate influence requires recognizing its systematic nature. This isn't a collection of isolated corrupt relationships, but a comprehensive system designed to ensure that corporate interests predominate in policy-making processes. The system operates through legal channels, making it difficult to challenge through traditional anti-corruption measures. The cumulative effect of this influence system is the gradual transformation of democratic governance into a form of corporate rule. Policy decisions increasingly reflect corporate priorities rather than public preferences, while regulatory agencies serve industry interests rather than public welfare. Citizens find themselves governed by laws written by corporate lobbyists and enforced by captured regulators. Breaking free from this web of influence requires more than ethics reforms or campaign finance restrictions, though these measures remain important. It requires recognizing that corporate influence operates as a comprehensive system designed to capture democratic institutions and redirect them toward corporate objectives. Only by understanding this system's scope and sophistication can citizens and policymakers begin to reclaim democratic control over their government. Chapter 3: Information Wars, Corporate Control of Media and Public Perception. The morning ritual of millions of Americans begins with a carefully orchestrated information experience. They wake to news alerts pushed to their smartphones by algorithms that have analyzed their browsing history, political preferences, and demographic profile. Over breakfast, they consume news stories that may have been sponsored by corporations, influenced by public relations campaigns, or shaped by editorial policies designed to maintain advertiser relationships. Their social media feeds present a curated reality, constructed by corporate platforms that profit from engagement and attention, regardless of the information's accuracy or social value. This information ecosystem, which fundamentally shapes public understanding of economic and political issues, is largely controlled by corporate interests that use sophisticated propaganda techniques to advance their objectives. The traditional model of independent journalism, while never perfect, has given way to a media landscape where corporate influence operates through multiple channels, from direct ownership to subtle forms of pressure that shape editorial decisions and news coverage. Media consolidation has placed control of American news in the hands of a small number of massive corporations with diverse business interests that extend far beyond journalism. When a media conglomerate owns television networks, film studios, theme parks, and telecommunications infrastructure, its news divisions face inherent conflicts of interest that influence coverage of issues affecting these other business lines. The transformation of news from a public service into a profit center has fundamentally altered journalistic priorities. News organizations, facing declining revenues and intense competition for audience attention, increasingly prioritize stories that generate clicks, views, and engagement over those that serve public interest. This shift has created a media environment that favors sensationalism over substance, conflict over nuance, and entertainment over information. Corporate public relations has evolved into a sophisticated industry that shapes news coverage through multiple strategies designed to advance client interests while maintaining plausible journalistic independence. PR professionals, many of whom are former journalists, understand how newsrooms operate and exploit these insights to influence coverage. The practice of earned media allows corporations to generate favorable news coverage without paying for advertising. Through carefully timed announcements, strategic leaks, and coordinated media campaigns, corporations can create news stories that present their perspectives as objective journalism. These campaigns often exploit journalists' need for sources and exclusive information, creating symbiotic relationships that compromise editorial independence. Video news releases represent one of the most direct forms of corporate influence over news content. These professionally produced segments, created by corporate communications teams, are distributed to television stations and often aired without disclosure of their corporate sponsorship. Local news stations, facing budget constraints and staffing limitations, frequently use these materials as legitimate news content, essentially broadcasting corporate advertisements disguised as journalism. Native advertising has blurred the lines between editorial content and paid promotion across all media platforms. These sponsored articles, designed to match the style and tone of legitimate journalism, appear alongside actual news stories and often receive similar prominence. While disclosure requirements theoretically distinguish native advertising from editorial content, these distinctions are often subtle and easily overlooked by consumers. The influence of corporate advertising extends beyond paid content to affect editorial decisions throughout news organizations. Publishers and broadcasters, dependent on advertising revenue for survival, face pressure to avoid coverage that might displease major advertisers. This pressure rarely manifests as explicit censorship, but operates through self-censorship, as editors and producers internalize advertiser preferences. Automotive manufacturers, pharmaceutical companies, and financial institutions represent major advertising categories that receive notably favorable coverage in media outlets dependent on their advertising spending. Investigative reporting on these industries has declined as news organizations become more reliant on their advertising revenue, creating an effective form of censorship through market pressure. The rise of digital media has created new opportunities for corporate influence while disrupting traditional journalism business models. Social media platforms, while presenting themselves as neutral technologies, employ algorithms that prioritize content based on engagement metrics that favor controversial and emotionally charged material. These algorithms effectively determine what information billions of people encounter, yet their operations remain largely opaque to public scrutiny. Corporate interests exploit social media platforms through coordinated influence campaigns that use multiple accounts, automated bots, and targeted advertising to amplify their messages while creating the appearance of organic grassroots support. These campaigns can rapidly spread misleading information, attack critics, and shape public discourse around specific issues. The data collection practices of digital platforms provide corporate interests with unprecedented insights into individual behavior and preferences, allowing for precisely targeted influence campaigns. Corporations can identify specific individuals who might be persuaded to support their positions and deliver customized messages designed to exploit their particular psychological vulnerabilities. Search engine optimization and content marketing have created new forms of corporate influence over information access. Companies employ teams of specialists to ensure that their preferred information appears prominently in search results while suppressing negative content. This manipulation of information architecture can significantly influence public understanding of issues by controlling what information people encounter when seeking answers to their questions. The decline of local journalism has created information deserts where corporate influence faces minimal scrutiny. As local newspapers and television stations close or reduce coverage, communities lose their primary sources of accountability journalism focused on local corporate behavior. This creates opportunities for corporate malfeasance to proceed without public oversight or media attention. Corporate interests have filled some of these information gaps with their own communications channels, creating company blogs, social media accounts, and even news-like publications that present corporate perspectives as authoritative information sources. These corporate communications efforts often employ journalistic techniques and formats while advancing specific business interests. Think tanks and research institutions serve as crucial nodes in corporate information campaigns, producing studies and reports that provide intellectual credibility for corporate positions. These organizations often present themselves as independent research institutions while receiving substantial funding from corporate interests with clear stakes in their research conclusions. The academic veneer of think tank research allows corporate interests to present biased analysis as objective scholarship, influencing policy debates and media coverage. Journalists citing think tank studies rarely disclose their corporate funding sources, inadvertently serving as conduits for corporate messaging while maintaining the appearance of independent reporting. Corporate influence over information extends into educational institutions through funding for research, endowed chairs, and academic programs. While this funding can support legitimate scholarship, it also creates opportunities for corporate interests to influence academic research agendas and shape scholarly discourse around issues affecting their industries. University researchers, facing pressure to secure external funding, may unconsciously bias their research toward conclusions that satisfy corporate sponsors. The publish or perish environment in academia creates incentives for researchers to maintain relationships with funding sources, potentially compromising the independence of scholarly inquiry. The entertainment industry serves as another vehicle for corporate influence over public perceptions. Product placement in films and television shows normalizes corporate brands and lifestyles, while entertainment content often presents sympathetic portrayals of corporate executives and business practices. These cultural messages, while subtle, shape public attitudes toward corporate power and economic inequality. Corporate sponsorship of cultural events, museums, and public institutions creates opportunities for influence over cultural narratives and public discourse. These sponsorships, while providing valuable public benefits, also allow corporations to associate themselves with positive cultural values while potentially influencing institutional positions on issues affecting their interests. The cumulative effect of corporate control over information is the creation of a mediated reality that serves corporate interests rather than public understanding. Citizens consuming this information may believe they're forming independent opinions based on objective facts, while actually responding to sophisticated influence campaigns designed to advance corporate objectives. This information control operates through multiple reinforcing mechanisms that make it difficult for citizens to access truly independent information sources. Corporate influence shapes not only what information is available, but also how it's framed, what sources are considered credible, and what questions are considered legitimate for public debate. The concentration of information control in the hands of corporate interests poses fundamental challenges to democratic governance. When citizens lack access to independent information about corporate behavior and its social consequences, they cannot make informed decisions about economic policy or hold corporate power accountable through democratic processes. Understanding corporate information control requires recognizing its systematic nature and sophisticated methods. This isn't simply a matter of biased reporting or corporate advertising, but a comprehensive system designed to shape public consciousness in ways that serve corporate interests. Breaking free from this information control requires developing new models of independent journalism, supporting diverse information sources, and creating regulatory frameworks that ensure public access to accurate information about corporate behavior. The battle for information independence represents one of the most crucial struggles for democratic accountability in the 21st century. The outcome of this battle will determine whether citizens can reclaim their ability to make informed decisions about corporate power and its role in society. Chapter 4: The Price of Silence, Whistleblowing, Cover-ups, and Corporate Retaliation. In a nondescript office building in suburban Maryland, a former pharmaceutical researcher sits quietly at her kitchen table, typing carefully worded emails to journalists and regulatory officials. Her hands shake slightly as she describes internal company documents that reveal dangerous side effects from a blockbuster medication were known to executives years before the public became aware of them. She knows that sending these emails will likely end her career in the industry she once loved, make her unemployable at major pharmaceutical companies, and potentially expose her to years of expensive litigation. Yet she also knows that remaining silent means allowing preventable harm to continue affecting thousands of patients who trust that their medications have been properly tested and monitored. This scene plays out in various forms across corporate America, as employees discover wrongdoing within their organizations and face the impossible choice between personal security and public welfare. The stories of corporate whistleblowers reveal the lengths to which companies will go to suppress information that threatens their interests, while demonstrating the courage required to speak truth to corporate power. Corporate whistleblowing represents one of the most direct challenges to corporate secrecy and control. When employees with inside knowledge of wrongdoing come forward, they provide the public with information that corporations spend enormous resources trying to conceal. Yet the corporate response to whistleblowing has evolved into a sophisticated system of retaliation designed to discourage others from following similar paths. The retaliation against whistleblowers begins long before they make their concerns public. Corporate cultures often punish employees who raise questions about company practices, even through internal channels. Employees who express concerns about safety, ethics, or legal compliance frequently find themselves marginalized, passed over for promotions, or subjected to hostile work environments designed to encourage their departure. Karen Silkwood's story, while decades old, established the template for corporate retaliation against whistleblowers. As a technician at a plutonium processing facility, Silkwood discovered safety violations that exposed workers and nearby communities to dangerous radiation levels. Her attempts to document and report these violations led to harassment, surveillance, and ultimately her mysterious death in a car accident while en route to meet with a journalist. While Silkwood's case involved extreme circumstances, the pattern of escalating retaliation against persistent whistleblowers has become standard corporate practice. Modern corporate retaliation employs more subtle but equally effective techniques. Employees who raise concerns often find themselves subjected to performance reviews that document previously unnoticed deficiencies, assigned to meaningless tasks that prevent them from accessing sensitive information, or transferred to positions that isolate them from colleagues who might support their concerns. Legal departments play crucial roles in corporate retaliation strategies, using litigation or the threat of litigation to silence employees who possess damaging information. Non-disclosure agreements, while ostensibly designed to protect legitimate trade secrets, are increasingly used to prevent employees from discussing any aspect of their work, including potential legal violations. Corporate legal teams exploit the power imbalance between individual employees and large corporations by threatening expensive litigation that most employees cannot afford to defend against. Even when these threats lack legal merit, they effectively silence employees who lack the resources to challenge them in court. The pharmaceutical industry exemplifies sophisticated corporate cover-up strategies. When clinical trials reveal dangerous side effects or questionable efficacy for new medications, companies employ multiple strategies to suppress or distort this information. They may discontinue studies that produce unfavorable results, manipulate statistical analyses to minimize apparent risks, or simply decline to publish negative findings while prominently promoting positive results. Dr. David Graham's experience at the FDA illustrates how corporate influence extends into regulatory agencies to suppress whistleblowing. Graham's research on Vioxx revealed that the popular pain medication significantly increased heart attack and stroke risks, but his attempts to publicize these findings were blocked by FDA superiors who had developed close relationships with the manufacturer. Only after Graham testified before Congress did the public learn about Vioxx's dangers, leading to the medication's withdrawal from the market. The financial industry has developed particularly sophisticated methods for suppressing employee concerns about illegal or unethical practices. Major banks employ teams of lawyers and investigators who monitor employee communications, investigate potential leaks, and coordinate responses to internal dissent. These internal security operations often resemble corporate intelligence agencies, complete with background investigations, surveillance, and psychological profiles of potentially problematic employees. When financial industry employees do come forward with evidence of wrongdoing, they face coordinated campaigns designed to destroy their credibility and professional prospects. Companies hire private investigators to examine whistleblowers' personal lives, searching for information that can be used to discredit their testimony. They also coordinate with other industry players to ensure that whistleblowers cannot find employment elsewhere in the financial sector. The technology industry's approach to whistleblowing reflects its unique culture and business model. Tech companies often present themselves as transparent and employee-friendly organizations, yet they employ sophisticated methods to control information and suppress dissent. These methods include comprehensive monitoring of employee communications, strict non-disclosure agreements that extend far beyond trade secrets, and corporate cultures that frame loyalty to the company as a moral imperative. Tech whistleblowers face particular challenges because their concerns often involve abstract issues like privacy, algorithm bias, or data manipulation that may not clearly violate existing laws. Companies can dismiss these concerns as matters of opinion or policy disagreement rather than factual allegations of wrongdoing, making it difficult for whistleblowers to find legal protection or media attention. Corporate PR departments coordinate sophisticated campaigns to discredit whistleblowers and minimize the impact of their revelations. These campaigns often focus on the whistleblower's personal motivations, suggesting they are disgruntled employees seeking revenge or attention rather than concerned citizens trying to protect public welfare. The personal cost of whistleblowing extends far beyond professional retaliation. Whistleblowers often experience severe psychological stress, financial hardship, and social isolation as a result of their decisions to come forward. The process of challenging powerful corporations can consume years of their lives, drain their savings, and destroy their personal relationships. Many whistleblowers describe feeling abandoned by the very institutions they thought would protect them. Government agencies often prove reluctant to investigate their claims, while law enforcement agencies may lack the resources or expertise to pursue complex corporate crimes. Even when whistleblowers ultimately prevail in legal proceedings, the victory often comes at enormous personal cost. The inadequacy of legal protections for whistleblowers reflects the influence of corporate interests over legislative and regulatory processes. While various laws theoretically protect employees who report wrongdoing, these protections are often weak, poorly enforced, and easily circumvented by sophisticated corporate legal strategies. Whistleblower protection laws typically require employees to follow specific procedures and meet stringent standards of proof that many legitimate concerns cannot satisfy. The lengthy legal processes involved in pursuing whistleblower claims often exhaust plaintiffs' resources while allowing corporate defendants to continue their alleged wrongdoing. Corporate settlements with whistleblowers often include comprehensive non-disclosure agreements that prevent public discussion of the underlying issues. These settlements allow companies to resolve individual cases while maintaining secrecy around systematic problems that might affect many more people. The collective impact of corporate retaliation against whistleblowing extends far beyond individual cases. When employees throughout an industry understand that raising concerns about corporate wrongdoing will likely destroy their careers, a culture of silence develops that allows systematic problems to persist unchallenged. This culture of silence is reinforced by professional networks that span corporate and regulatory environments. Employees who challenge one company often find themselves blacklisted throughout their industry, making whistleblowing a career-ending decision regardless of the merit of their concerns. The suppression of whistleblowing represents a fundamental threat to democratic accountability and public safety. When employees with direct knowledge of corporate wrongdoing are silenced through retaliation, the public loses access to crucial information needed to make informed decisions about corporate behavior and regulatory policy. Recent high-profile cases have demonstrated both the importance of whistleblowing and the sophistication of corporate retaliation. Frances Haugen's revelations about Facebook's internal research on the harmful effects of its platforms sparked global discussions about social media regulation, while her experience also illustrated the personal costs of challenging powerful tech companies. Similarly, Boeing employees who raised concerns about the 737 MAX aircraft design faced retaliation that may have contributed to the crashes that killed hundreds of people. These cases demonstrate that corporate suppression of whistleblowing can have life-and-death consequences that extend far beyond individual companies or industries. The digital age has created new opportunities for both whistleblowing and corporate retaliation. Digital communications leave trails that can provide evidence of wrongdoing, but they also enable sophisticated surveillance of employee activities. Companies can monitor employee emails, internet usage, and even physical movements to identify potential sources of leaks. Anonymous digital platforms and encrypted communications have provided new tools for whistleblowers to share information while protecting their identities, but corporations have responded with increasingly sophisticated counter-surveillance measures and legal strategies designed to unmask anonymous sources. The international nature of modern corporations creates additional challenges for whistleblowing. Companies can shift operations to jurisdictions with weaker whistleblower protections, while employees may face retaliation in countries where they lack legal recourse. This global dimension of corporate power requires international cooperation to protect whistleblowers effectively. Understanding the price of silence requires recognizing that corporate suppression of whistleblowing is not an accidental byproduct of business operations, but a deliberate strategy designed to maintain corporate secrecy and avoid accountability. The systematic nature of this suppression demonstrates the importance of corporate secrecy to maintaining current power structures. Breaking the culture of silence that surrounds corporate wrongdoing requires more than stronger legal protections for whistleblowers, though such protections remain essential. It requires creating alternative channels for information sharing, supporting independent journalism and investigation, and developing corporate cultures that genuinely value ethical behavior over profit maximization. The courage of corporate whistleblowers provides hope that truth can eventually prevail over corporate power, but only if society creates institutions and protections that make such courage more viable and less costly for those who choose to speak out. Chapter 5: Breaking the Chains Toward Corporate Accountability and Transparency. The mahogany-paneled boardroom falls silent as the chief executive officer reviews the quarterly earnings report that will be released to shareholders in mere hours. The numbers look impressive on the surface: revenue growth, expanding profit margins, and cost reductions that will please Wall Street analysts. Yet this executive knows that these figures obscure a more complex reality involving environmental damage, worker exploitation, and regulatory violations that could eventually threaten the company's long-term viability. Across town, in a community center meeting room with folding chairs and fluorescent lighting, local residents, union representatives, and environmental advocates gather to discuss the same company's impact on their community. They share stories of health problems that might be linked to industrial pollution, economic displacement from plant closures, and frustration with government officials who seem more responsive to corporate interests than citizen concerns. These two scenes represent the fundamental disconnect between corporate accountability and democratic governance in contemporary America. While corporate executives operate with minimal public oversight and face few meaningful consequences for social and environmental harm, ordinary citizens struggle to hold these powerful entities accountable through traditional democratic processes. Creating genuine corporate accountability requires understanding why existing mechanisms have failed and developing new approaches that can effectively constrain corporate power while preserving the benefits of market-based economic systems. This transformation cannot be achieved through minor reforms or voluntary corporate initiatives. It requires fundamental changes in how society organizes economic power and distributes political influence. The failure of existing accountability mechanisms reflects the systematic capture of regulatory institutions by the interests they were designed to oversee. Regulatory agencies, dependent on industry expertise and revolving door relationships with corporate interests, have evolved into enablers of corporate behavior rather than constraints on corporate power. Traditional approaches to corporate regulation assumed that government agencies would maintain independence from industry influence and that market competition would provide natural checks on corporate behavior. These assumptions have proven false in practice, as demonstrated by repeated regulatory failures across multiple industries and decades. The 2008 financial crisis exemplified regulatory failure on a massive scale. Despite clear evidence of systematic fraud and reckless behavior throughout the financial industry, regulatory agencies failed to prevent the crisis or hold responsible parties accountable afterward. The resulting taxpayer bailouts pivot.
Chapter 1: The Architecture of Dynasties. Wealthy families who maintain their influence across multiple generations do not rely simply on accumulated assets or business success, but rather construct sophisticated institutional and cultural systems that preserve and transfer not only financial wealth, but also social capital, political influence, and strategic knowledge that enables each generation to maintain and expand the family's power. Understanding how these dynastic systems operate requires examining the deliberate strategies that wealthy families employ to create permanent advantages for their descendants, while insulating themselves from the economic and social forces that affect ordinary families. The family office structures that serve ultra-wealthy families represent far more than simple wealth management services, functioning instead as private institutions that coordinate investment strategies, tax planning, political influence, philanthropic activities, and family governance across multiple generations and jurisdictions. These family offices employ teams of investment professionals, tax attorneys, political consultants, and strategic advisors who work exclusively for single families, providing a level of personalized service and strategic coordination that allows wealthy families to optimize their financial, political, and social positions in ways that would be impossible for families without such resources. The scale and sophistication of major family offices often rivals that of significant corporations or government agencies. The trust and legal entity structures that wealthy families use to hold and transfer assets create complex webs of ownership that can span multiple generations, jurisdictions, and asset categories, while providing tax advantages, legal protections, and control mechanisms that preserve family wealth and influence. Dynasty trusts, family limited partnerships, private foundations, and offshore entities can be combined in sophisticated arrangements that minimize tax obligations, protect assets from creditors and legal judgments, and maintain family control over businesses and investments for centuries. These legal structures often operate according to rules and jurisdictions that are specifically designed to benefit wealthy families while remaining largely inaccessible to ordinary individuals. The educational and cultural transmission systems that wealthy families employ to prepare their children for positions of leadership and influence extend far beyond access to elite schools and universities, to include specialized mentoring, cultural education, and social conditioning that develops the skills, networks, and worldview necessary for maintaining family power. Wealthy children often receive instruction in leadership, public speaking, financial management, and political strategy from private tutors and specialized programs, while also being exposed to adult discussions about business strategy, political influence, and family legacy that provide early training in the exercise of power and authority. The marriage and alliance strategies that wealthy families use to expand their influence and protect their interests involve careful cultivation of relationships with other powerful families through social events, educational institutions, and business partnerships that create opportunities for advantageous marriages and strategic alliances. These marriage strategies can combine financial resources, business networks, and political influence from multiple families, while also creating mutual obligations and support systems that strengthen the position of all allied families. The social institutions and cultural practices that facilitate these alliances operate largely outside public view, while playing crucial roles in maintaining elite power structures. The business and investment diversification approaches that wealthy families employ extend across multiple industries, asset classes, and geographic regions in ways that provide both financial security and strategic influence over important economic sectors. Rather than concentrating their wealth in single businesses or industries, successful wealthy families typically develop portfolios that include real estate, financial services, technology companies, natural resources, and other investments that provide both income and strategic positioning. This diversification strategy allows wealthy families to maintain influence across different sectors, while also providing multiple sources of income and political leverage. The philanthropic and public service activities that wealthy families engage in serve multiple purposes, including tax benefits, reputation management, political influence, and genuine charitable goals, while also providing platforms for family members to develop public profiles and build relationships with political leaders, academic institutions, and other influential organizations. Strategic philanthropy can provide wealthy families with influence over educational institutions, research organizations, and policy development, while also creating positive public reputations that facilitate business activities and political influence. The coordination of philanthropic activities across family members and generations can amplify these benefits while creating lasting institutional relationships. The political influence and government relationship strategies that wealthy families employ involve long-term investments in political candidates, policy organizations, and government relationships that provide access to decision-makers and influence over policy development across multiple electoral cycles and political administrations. These influence strategies typically involve contributions to candidates from both major political parties, support for think tanks and policy organizations across the political spectrum, and cultivation of relationships with government officials who may move between public and private sector positions throughout their careers. The media and reputation management systems that wealthy families employ to control their public image and influence public discourse involves sophisticated public relations strategies, media ownership or influence, and careful management of family members' public activities and statements. These reputation management efforts can include funding for favorable media coverage, legal strategies to prevent negative publicity, and strategic philanthropy or public service that creates positive associations with family names and activities. The control over information and narrative development allows wealthy families to shape public perception in ways that support their business and political interests. The succession planning and leadership development processes that wealthy families implement to prepare future generations for leadership roles involve systematic assessment of family members' abilities and interests, specialized education and training programs, and gradual introduction to family business and investment activities. These succession processes often begin in childhood and continue throughout family members' lives, involving mentoring relationships, leadership opportunities, and exposure to family decision-making processes that prepare each generation to maintain and expand family influence. The risk management and asset protection strategies that wealthy families employ involve geographic diversification, legal protections, security measures, and contingency planning that insulates family wealth and members from various forms of economic, political, and physical threats. These protection strategies can include maintaining assets and residences in multiple countries, employing private security services, using legal structures that shield assets from potential liabilities, and developing contingency plans for various crisis scenarios that could affect family interests. The network cultivation and relationship management activities that wealthy families engage in involve systematic development of relationships with other powerful individuals and families through social institutions, business partnerships, charitable activities, and cultural events that create ongoing opportunities for mutual support and collaboration. These networking activities often involve multi-generational relationship building, where connections established by parents are maintained and developed by their children, creating lasting alliances that can span decades or centuries. The information and intelligence gathering capabilities that wealthy families develop provide them with early access to market information, political developments, and social trends that can affect their business and investment decisions. These intelligence capabilities can include relationships with government officials, business leaders, and academic researchers who provide inside information about policy developments, market opportunities, and emerging trends. The access to superior information allows wealthy families to make better investment and strategic decisions, while also positioning themselves to benefit from changes that may disadvantage others. Chapter 2: The Education of Elites. The educational experiences that shape the children of wealthy families operate through carefully orchestrated systems that extend far beyond academic instruction to include social conditioning, network development, and cultural transmission that prepare these individuals for positions of leadership and influence, while also instilling the values, skills, and worldview necessary for maintaining family power across generations. Understanding how elite education actually functions reveals how educational advantages compound over time to create permanent class distinctions that persist regardless of individual merit or effort. The early childhood development programs that wealthy families provide for their children involve intensive educational interventions that begin in infancy and continue through adolescence, including specialized nannies and tutors, enrichment activities, travel experiences, and exposure to adult conversations about business and politics that provide early advantages in cognitive development, cultural knowledge, and social skills. These early interventions can create developmental advantages that persist throughout life, while also providing cultural knowledge and social conditioning that distinguishes elite children from their peers. The investment in early childhood development often exceeds the total educational expenditures that middle-class families make throughout their children's entire educational careers. The private school systems that serve wealthy families operate according to different principles and priorities than public education, emphasizing leadership development, critical thinking, and social network formation, rather than standardized testing and compliance with bureaucratic requirements. Elite private schools often maintain very low student-to-teacher ratios, employ teachers with advanced degrees and specialized expertise, and provide resources and opportunities that are not available in public schools. These schools also serve as social institutions where wealthy families can connect with each other, while their children develop friendships and relationships that may continue throughout their lives. The university admission and preparation strategies that wealthy families employ involve sophisticated approaches to standardized testing, extracurricular activities, and application development that often include professional consultants, specialized tutoring, and strategic planning that begins years before college applications are submitted. These preparation strategies can include test preparation that costs tens of thousands of dollars, extracurricular activities that are designed to appeal to college admissions committees, and application consulting that helps students present themselves in ways that maximize their chances of admission to elite institutions. The investment in college preparation often exceeds the annual income of middle-class families. The elite university experiences that wealthy students encounter involve not only access to world-class academic instruction and research opportunities, but also social institutions, networking events, and cultural activities that facilitate relationship building with other elite students and faculty members who may become important contacts throughout their careers. Elite universities often maintain exclusive social organizations, alumni networks, and cultural institutions that provide ongoing benefits long after graduation, while also creating shared experiences and cultural references that facilitate communication and relationship building among graduates. The graduate school and professional development opportunities that wealthy families provide for their children often include access to the most prestigious graduate programs, professional schools, and specialized training opportunities that provide credentials and expertise necessary for leadership positions in business, politics, and other influential fields. These advanced educational opportunities often involve substantial financial investments, while also providing access to faculty, research opportunities, and professional networks that are not available to students without family resources and connections. The international education and cultural exposure that wealthy families provide for their children involves extensive travel, language instruction, and cultural immersion experiences that develop global perspectives and cross-cultural competencies that are increasingly important for business and political leadership. These international experiences often include studying abroad, internships with international organizations, and cultural exchanges that provide exposure to different political systems, business practices, and social arrangements, while also developing language skills and cultural knowledge that facilitate international business and political relationships. The mentoring and coaching relationships that wealthy families arrange for their children involve access to successful business leaders, political figures, and other influential individuals who provide guidance, advice, and career development opportunities that are not available to young people without family connections. These mentoring relationships often begin during adolescence and continue throughout early career development, providing insights into business strategy, political maneuvering, and social dynamics that cannot be learned through formal education alone. The internship and work experience opportunities that wealthy families provide for their children often involve positions with prestigious organizations, access to decision-making processes, and exposure to high-level business and political activities that provide practical experience and networking opportunities while also developing skills and knowledge that are relevant for future leadership positions. These work experiences often involve positions that are not publicly advertised and require family connections or social networks to access. The cultural and artistic education that wealthy children receive includes exposure to fine arts, classical music, literature, and other cultural forms that provide shared references and social markers that facilitate communication and relationship building within elite circles. This cultural education often includes private instruction in music, art, and literature, while also involving attendance at cultural events, museums, and performances that develop aesthetic sensibilities and cultural knowledge that distinguish elite individuals from those without such exposure. The social skills and etiquette training that wealthy children receive prepares them for social situations and cultural contexts that are specific to elite environments, including formal dinners, charity events, business entertaining, and political gatherings where specific behavioral norms and communication styles are expected. This social training includes instruction in conversation skills, dining etiquette, public speaking, and other social competencies that facilitate success in elite social and professional environments. The leadership development and public service preparation that wealthy families provide for their children often includes opportunities to participate in student government, community service projects, and leadership programs that develop skills in organizing, public speaking, and decision-making, while also creating records of civic engagement that support future political or business careers. These leadership experiences often involve access to real decision-making authority and resources that allow young people to develop practical experience in exercising power and authority. The financial education and investment training that wealthy children receive provides them with sophisticated understanding of financial markets, investment strategies, tax planning, and wealth management that enables them to preserve and grow family wealth while also making informed decisions about business and investment opportunities. This financial education often begins in childhood and continues throughout adolescence and early adulthood, involving both formal instruction and practical experience with family investment and business activities. The family business and legacy education that wealthy children receive involves systematic exposure to family business operations, investment strategies, and philanthropic activities that prepares them to assume leadership roles in family enterprises, while also understanding the history, values, and strategic goals that guide family decision-making across generations. This legacy education involves both formal instruction and informal exposure to family discussions and decision-making processes that provide insights into the exercise of power and influence within family structures. Chapter 3: The Networks of Influence. The relationship systems that connect wealthy families to centers of power operate through intricate webs of social connections, institutional affiliations, and mutual obligations that provide access to decision-makers, early information about opportunities and threats, and collaborative mechanisms for advancing shared interests across different sectors of society. These influence networks function as invisible infrastructure that allows wealthy families to coordinate their activities, share information, and exercise collective power in ways that are largely hidden from public view while profoundly affecting economic and political outcomes. The social club memberships and exclusive institution affiliations that wealthy families maintain provide regular opportunities for informal interaction with other powerful individuals in settings that facilitate relationship building, information sharing, and strategic coordination, without the formal constraints and public scrutiny that characterize official business or political meetings. These exclusive institutions often have membership criteria based on family background, educational credentials, or social connections, rather than professional qualifications, creating environments where wealthy individuals can interact based on shared social status rather than specific business or political interests. The charitable board positions and philanthropic organization leadership roles that wealthy family members assume provide platforms for exercising influence over educational institutions, cultural organizations, and policy research, while also creating opportunities to interact with political leaders, academic experts, and business executives who serve on the same boards or participate in the same philanthropic activities. These charitable positions often involve substantial influence over budget decisions, strategic planning, and personnel selection, while also providing tax benefits and positive public relations for family members who participate. The corporate board memberships and business partnership relationships that wealthy families develop create opportunities for coordinating business strategies, sharing market information, and influencing industry policies, while also providing multiple income streams and investment opportunities that may not be available through public markets. These business relationships often involve cross-ownership arrangements, joint ventures, and strategic alliances that create mutual dependencies and shared interests among different wealthy families and business organizations. The political fundraising and candidate support networks that wealthy families participate in provide access to elected officials, government appointees, and political operatives, while also creating opportunities to influence candidate selection, policy development, and political strategy across different parties and levels of government. These political networks often involve long-term relationship building with political figures who may move between elected office, government appointments, and private sector positions throughout their careers, creating ongoing access and influence opportunities. The academic and research institution relationships that wealthy families cultivate through donations, board memberships, and research funding provide influence over intellectual development, policy research, and educational content, while also creating access to academic experts, research findings, and student recruitment opportunities. These academic relationships can influence research priorities, educational curricula, and public policy discussions, while also providing wealthy families with early access to research findings and emerging trends that may affect their business and investment interests. The media and communication industry connections that wealthy families maintain through ownership stakes, advertising relationships, and personal connections provide influence over news coverage, editorial policies, and public discourse, while also creating opportunities to shape public opinion and political narratives in ways that support family interests. These media relationships can provide access to journalists, editors, and media executives, while also creating opportunities to influence information flows and public perception of issues that affect wealthy family interests. The international and diplomatic relationship networks that wealthy families develop through business activities, cultural exchanges, and political connections provide access to foreign government officials, international business leaders, and global policy organizations, while also creating opportunities to influence international economic policies, trade agreements, and diplomatic relationships. These international networks often provide early information about global political and economic developments, while also creating opportunities for international business development and investment. The professional service provider networks that wealthy families employ include specialized lawyers, accountants, consultants, and other experts who provide not only technical services, but also access to information, relationships, and strategic advice that extends far beyond their formal professional roles. These service providers often work exclusively with wealthy clients and develop deep understanding of family interests and strategies, while also maintaining relationships with other wealthy families and powerful institutions that can provide additional networking and information sharing opportunities. The cultural and artistic institution relationships that wealthy families develop through patronage, board memberships, and cultural participation provide access to cultural leaders, artistic communities, and international cultural networks, while also creating platforms for social interaction and relationship building with other wealthy individuals who share similar cultural interests. These cultural relationships often provide opportunities for international travel, cultural exchanges, and social events that facilitate business and political relationship building in informal settings. The religious and spiritual organization affiliations that some wealthy families maintain provide access to religious leaders, faith-based networks, and moral authority that can influence public opinion and political discourse, while also creating opportunities for charitable activities and community engagement that enhance family reputations and provide additional networking opportunities. These religious relationships often involve substantial financial contributions that provide influence over religious institutions and their activities. The recreational and lifestyle activity networks that wealthy families participate in through private clubs, sporting events, and leisure activities provide regular opportunities for informal interaction with other wealthy individuals in relaxed settings that facilitate relationship building and information sharing without the formal constraints of business or political meetings. These recreational networks often involve expensive activities and exclusive venues that serve as markers of social status, while also providing opportunities for ongoing relationship maintenance and development. The family intermarriage and alliance patterns that connect different wealthy families create permanent relationships and shared interests that persist across generations, while also combining financial resources, business networks, and political influence from multiple families. These marriage alliances often involve strategic considerations about compatibility of family interests, business opportunities, and social positioning, while also creating extended family networks that provide additional relationship and influence opportunities. The crisis management and mutual support systems that wealthy families maintain provide assistance during periods of legal, financial, or reputational challenges, while also creating collective defense mechanisms against threats to shared interests. These support systems can include legal assistance, financial support, political intervention, and media management that help individual families address problems, while also protecting the interests and reputation of the broader wealthy class. Chapter 4: The Wealth Preservation Machine. The financial and legal strategies that wealthy families employ to preserve and transfer their assets across generations involve sophisticated systems of tax minimization, asset protection, and wealth management that operate through complex structures spanning multiple jurisdictions, while taking advantage of legal loopholes and regulatory advantages that are specifically designed to benefit large wealth holders. Understanding how these wealth preservation systems operate reveals how wealthy families can maintain and grow their fortunes, while avoiding many of the taxes, regulations, and economic risks that affect ordinary families. The offshore financial structures that wealthy families utilize include networks of trusts, foundations, and corporate entities established in jurisdictions with favorable tax laws, banking secrecy protections, and legal frameworks that shield assets from taxation, creditor claims, and regulatory oversight in the family's home countries. These offshore structures can involve multiple layers of ownership and control that obscure the true beneficial ownership of assets, while providing legal mechanisms for transferring wealth between generations without triggering estate taxes or other transfer obligations. The complexity of these offshore arrangements often makes them difficult for tax authorities and regulators to understand and monitor effectively. The dynasty trust and perpetual trust structures that enable wealthy families to transfer assets to future generations while maintaining family control and avoiding estate taxes can preserve family wealth for centuries, while providing ongoing income streams for family members and maintaining centralized investment management and strategic coordination. These trust structures often include provisions that allow family members to serve as trustees or advisors, while also providing mechanisms for adapting trust terms to changing circumstances and family needs over time. The private banking and wealth management services that cater exclusively to ultra-wealthy families provide sophisticated investment strategies, tax planning services, and financial coordination that are not available to ordinary investors, while also maintaining the privacy and discretion that wealthy families require for their financial affairs. Private banks often provide services that include currency hedging, commodity trading, private equity investments, and other specialized financial products, while also coordinating with family lawyers, accountants, and other advisors to optimize overall family financial strategies. The tax minimization and avoidance strategies that wealthy families employ involve sophisticated legal structures and financial arrangements that can reduce effective tax rates on investment income, business profits, and wealth transfers to levels far below those paid by ordinary taxpayers, while remaining technically legal under current tax laws. These strategies often involve complex timing arrangements, jurisdictional arbitrage, and legal entity structures that take advantage of differences between tax systems in different countries, while also exploiting loopholes and ambiguities in domestic tax laws. The asset protection and liability shielding mechanisms that wealthy families employ protect family wealth from potential creditor claims, legal judgments, and other liabilities that could affect family businesses or individual family members, while also providing mechanisms for transferring assets beyond the reach of potential claimants. These protection strategies often involve trusts, limited liability entities, and insurance arrangements that create legal barriers between family assets and potential liabilities, while also providing mechanisms for continuing family control and benefit from protected assets. The business succession and continuity planning that wealthy families implement ensures that family businesses and investment portfolios can continue operating effectively across generational transitions, while also maintaining family control and strategic direction, despite changes in family leadership and ownership structures. These succession plans often involve gradual leadership transitions, employee stock ownership plans, and family governance structures that balance continuity with adaptation to changing circumstances and family needs. The philanthropic and charitable giving strategies that wealthy families employ provide significant tax benefits, while also creating vehicles for maintaining family influence and control over charitable assets and activities across multiple generations. Private foundations, charitable remainder trusts, and donor-advised funds can provide tax deductions for charitable contributions, while allowing families to maintain involvement in charitable activities and investment decisions for extended periods. These charitable structures can also provide employment and leadership opportunities for family members, while advancing family values and interests through charitable activities. The real estate and tangible asset investment strategies that wealthy families pursue often involve acquiring appreciating assets that provide both investment returns and personal enjoyment, while also offering opportunities for tax benefits, estate planning advantages, and portfolio diversification. Real estate investments can provide depreciation deductions, like-kind exchange opportunities, and estate valuation discounts, while also serving as family residences, recreational properties, or legacy assets that can be passed to future generations. The insurance and risk management products that wealthy families purchase include sophisticated life insurance, annuity and risk management arrangements that provide tax advantages, estate planning benefits, and wealth transfer opportunities, while also protecting family wealth from various risks and uncertainties. These insurance products often involve complex structures that combine investment management, tax planning, and risk protection in ways that are specifically designed for wealthy families' unique needs and circumstances. The investment management and portfolio construction strategies that wealthy families employ often involve alternative investments, private markets, and specialized investment vehicles that are not available to ordinary investors, while also providing opportunities for higher returns, portfolio diversification, and strategic positioning in emerging markets and industries. These investment strategies often involve direct ownership of businesses, private equity investments, hedge fund participation, and other alternative investments that require substantial minimum investments and sophisticated investor qualifications. The family governance and decision-making structures that wealthy families establish provide mechanisms for coordinating investment decisions, business strategy, and family activities across multiple generations and family branches, while also resolving conflicts and maintaining family unity despite the challenges that can arise from shared wealth and business interests. These governance structures often include family councils, mission statements, and conflict resolution mechanisms that help families maintain cohesion and shared purpose across generations. The legal and regulatory compliance strategies that wealthy families employ ensure that their wealth preservation activities remain within legal boundaries, while also taking maximum advantage of available legal opportunities and loopholes. These compliance strategies often involve teams of specialized attorneys and advisors who monitor regulatory changes, identify new opportunities, and structure family activities to minimize legal risks while maximizing financial benefits. The information security and privacy protection measures that wealthy families implement protect sensitive financial information, family business details, and personal information from unauthorized disclosure, while also maintaining the discretion and confidentiality that wealthy families require for their financial and business activities. These security measures can include digital security systems, information access controls, and confidentiality agreements that protect family privacy, while enabling necessary coordination and communication among family members and advisors. Chapter 5: The Future of Aristocracy. The evolution of wealthy family power and influence in the contemporary era reflects both the persistence of traditional elite strategies and their adaptation to new technological, economic, and political realities that create both opportunities and challenges for maintaining dynastic wealth and influence across generations. Understanding how wealthy families are adapting their strategies for the future reveals both the resilience of elite power structures and the potential vulnerabilities that could affect their continued dominance in an era of increasing inequality awareness and democratic accountability demands. The technological adaptation strategies that wealthy families are employing include investments in emerging technologies, development of digital platforms and services, and utilization of artificial intelligence and data analytics to enhance their business operations, investment strategies, and influence activities, while also adapting to digital communication channels and social media platforms that provide new opportunities for reputation management and public engagement. These technological adaptations allow wealthy families to maintain relevance and influence in rapidly changing economic and social environments, while also creating new opportunities for wealth generation and political influence. The globalization and international expansion efforts that wealthy families are pursuing include developing business operations, investment portfolios, and influence networks that span multiple countries and regions, while also establishing residences, citizenship arrangements, and legal structures that provide geographic diversification and flexibility in response to changing political and economic conditions. These international strategies provide wealthy families with options for relocating assets, operations, and family members in response to adverse conditions, while also creating opportunities for regulatory arbitrage and tax optimization across different jurisdictions. The next generation preparation and leadership development programs that wealthy families are implementing include sophisticated educational, mentoring, and experience-building activities that prepare younger family members for leadership roles in an era of increased public scrutiny, social media transparency, and stakeholder capitalism expectations. These preparation programs often include training in public relations, social responsibility, and stakeholder engagement, while also providing exposure to diverse perspectives and social issues that may affect family business and investment activities. The philanthropic evolution and social impact strategies that wealthy families are adopting include more sophisticated approaches to charitable giving, social impact investing, and stakeholder engagement that respond to increasing expectations for corporate social responsibility and elite accountability, while also providing opportunities for positive reputation management and political influence. These philanthropic strategies often involve direct engagement with social issues, partnership with non-profit organizations, and measurement of social impact outcomes, while also maintaining family control and strategic direction over charitable activities. The political adaptation and influence modernization efforts that wealthy families are pursuing include developing new approaches to political engagement that account for increased transparency requirements, public scrutiny of political influence, and changing media landscapes, while also maintaining access to decision-makers and influence over policy development. These political adaptations may include more indirect influence strategies, support for policy research and development, and engagement with grassroots organizing and advocacy activities that provide influence without direct political contributions or lobbying activities. The business model innovation and industry transformation strategies that wealthy families are implementing include investments in new industries, development of innovative business models, and adaptation to changing consumer preferences and social expectations, while also maintaining profitability and competitive advantages in traditional business areas. These business innovations often involve sustainability initiatives, technology integration, and stakeholder engagement approaches that respond to changing market conditions while also creating new opportunities for growth and influence. The risk management and security enhancement measures that wealthy families are adopting include more sophisticated approaches to physical security, cybersecurity, and reputation protection that account for new threats and vulnerabilities, while also maintaining family privacy and operational flexibility. These security measures often involve professional security services, digital protection systems, and crisis management capabilities that provide comprehensive protection against various threats, while also enabling continued business and social activities. The cultural and values adaptation strategies that wealthy families are employing include evolution of family mission statements, value systems, and cultural practices that maintain family identity and cohesion, while also adapting to changing social expectations and generational differences within families. These cultural adaptations often involve balancing traditional family values with contemporary social consciousness and responsibility expectations, while also maintaining family unity and shared purpose across generations with different experiences and perspectives. The regulatory response and compliance strategies that wealthy families are developing include anticipation of increased regulation and oversight of wealth concentration, tax avoidance and political influence, while also developing legal and political strategies for responding to regulatory changes and maintaining family interests despite increased scrutiny and accountability requirements. These compliance strategies often involve enhanced legal and regulatory monitoring, development of alternative structures and strategies, and political engagement to influence regulatory development. The social license and legitimacy maintenance efforts that wealthy families are pursuing include developing narratives and activities that justify their wealth and influence, while also demonstrating social value and contribution to justify continued elite status and privileges. These legitimacy efforts often involve emphasis on entrepreneurship, job creation, philanthropic contributions, and social impact activities, while also engaging with public discourse about inequality and elite responsibility. The succession and continuity planning evolution that wealthy families are implementing includes more sophisticated approaches to leadership transition, family governance, and wealth management that account for larger and more diverse family groups, changing generational values and expectations, and more complex business and investment portfolios. These succession plans often involve professional family governance advisors, conflict resolution mechanisms, and flexibility for adapting to changing family circumstances and external conditions. The competitive positioning and market advantage strategies that wealthy families are developing include maintaining and enhancing their competitive advantages in business, investment, and influence activities, while also adapting to increased competition from new wealth creators, changing market conditions, and evolving regulatory environments. These competitive strategies often involve continuous innovation, strategic partnership development, and market positioning activities that maintain family prominence and influence despite changing competitive dynamics. The legacy and impact optimization efforts that wealthy families are pursuing include developing approaches to wealth and influence that create positive long-term impacts, while also maintaining family interests and advantages across generations. These legacy strategies often involve balancing family benefit with social contribution, while also creating institutions and activities that perpetuate family influence and values beyond the lifetimes of current family members, while adapting to changing social expectations and accountability requirements.
Chapter 1: The Illusion of Medical Progress. Public health statistics that are routinely celebrated as evidence of medical advancement often mask a more complex reality where chronic diseases have reached epidemic proportions, life expectancy gains have stagnated or reversed in many developed countries, and quality of life indicators suggest that despite enormous healthcare spending, populations are becoming sicker rather than healthier. This disconnect between medical technological progress and actual population health outcomes reveals fundamental problems in how health is conceptualized, measured, and addressed in modern healthcare systems. Life expectancy, long considered the gold standard measure of population health progress, has stagnated or declined in many developed countries over the past decade, with the United States experiencing 3 consecutive years of declining life expectancy before the COVID-19 pandemic. These declines cannot be attributed solely to external factors like drug overdoses or suicides, but reflect broader patterns of chronic disease, environmental health problems, and healthcare system failures that suggest systemic issues with current approaches to population health. Chronic disease prevalence has increased dramatically across virtually all categories of non-communicable diseases, with conditions like diabetes, heart disease, cancer, autoimmune disorders, and neurological diseases affecting larger percentages of the population than ever before. While improved diagnosis and longer survival may explain some increases, the magnitude and consistency of these trends across different diseases and populations suggest that environmental and lifestyle factors are creating genuine increases in disease incidence. Childhood health indicators paint a particularly concerning picture, with dramatic increases in asthma, allergies, autism, ADHD, obesity, and other conditions that were relatively rare in previous generations. The fact that children, who should represent the healthiest segment of the population, are experiencing unprecedented rates of chronic health problems suggests that environmental and developmental factors are fundamentally altering human health trajectories. Healthcare spending has increased exponentially without corresponding improvements in population health outcomes, with the United States spending nearly twice as much per capita on healthcare as other developed countries while achieving worse results on most health indicators. This inverse relationship between healthcare spending and health outcomes suggests that current medical approaches may be addressing symptoms rather than causes, while potentially creating iatrogenic harm through overtreatment and medical interventions. Mental health statistics reveal a crisis of psychological well-being that undermines conventional narratives about social progress and quality of life improvements. Depression, anxiety, suicide, and substance abuse have increased dramatically across developed countries, particularly among young people who theoretically have access to more opportunities and resources than any previous generation. Environmental health threats that receive minimal public attention include widespread chemical contamination, electromagnetic field exposure, air and water pollution, and other factors that create population-wide exposures to substances and conditions that can affect health across entire populations. The lag time between environmental exposures and health effects means that current disease patterns may reflect environmental conditions from decades past, while current exposures may be creating health problems that will emerge in future decades. Food system degradation has fundamentally altered human nutrition through industrial agriculture, food processing, and chemical contamination that have reduced the nutritional density of foods while increasing exposure to pesticides, additives, and other potentially harmful substances. The modern food system prioritizes shelf life, appearance, and profit over nutritional quality, creating widespread malnutrition even among populations with apparent food security. Antibiotic resistance has reached crisis levels where common infections may become untreatable, while pharmaceutical development has failed to keep pace with the evolution of resistant bacteria. This crisis has been largely hidden from public view, despite representing one of the most serious threats to modern medicine, with the potential to return humanity to pre-antibiotic mortality patterns for routine medical procedures and infections. Healthcare-associated infections and medical errors cause hundreds of thousands of deaths annually in healthcare facilities, representing a largely hidden epidemic of harm within the medical system itself. The culture of secrecy and legal protection surrounding medical errors prevents accurate assessment of the true scope of iatrogenic harm, while limiting opportunities for systematic improvement in patient safety. Social determinants of health, including poverty, inequality, social isolation, and community breakdown, have profound effects on population health that dwarf the impact of most medical interventions, yet these factors receive minimal attention in healthcare policy and practice. The medicalization of social problems diverts attention from addressing root causes of poor health, while creating profitable treatment markets for conditions that might be better addressed through social and environmental interventions. Occupational health hazards affect millions of workers who are exposed to chemicals, physical dangers, and psychosocial stressors that can cause both immediate harm and long-term health problems. The burden of occupational disease is often underestimated because work-related health problems may not manifest for years or decades after exposure, while workers may lack the resources and knowledge necessary to identify and document occupational causes of their health problems. Pharmaceutical side effects and adverse drug reactions cause significant morbidity and mortality that is often underreported and inadequately studied, while the interaction effects of multiple medications taken concurrently remain largely unknown. The increasing polypharmacy patterns among aging populations create unprecedented combinations of drug interactions, while the long-term effects of many medications remain uncertain due to inadequate post-market surveillance. Disease prevention approaches that could address many health problems at their source receive minimal resources compared to treatment interventions that generate more revenue for healthcare systems while often providing limited benefits for population health. The emphasis on treatment over prevention reflects economic incentives within healthcare systems that profit from sickness rather than health. Understanding the gap between apparent medical progress and actual population health trends is crucial for developing more effective approaches to protecting and improving public health. This awareness can inform both individual health decisions and advocacy for systemic changes that address the root causes of widespread health problems rather than simply treating their symptoms. Chapter 2: The Regulatory Capture of Health Agencies. Government agencies responsible for protecting public health have been systematically compromised by the industries they are supposed to regulate, creating regulatory environments that often serve commercial interests rather than public health, while maintaining the appearance of scientific objectivity and consumer protection. This regulatory capture occurs through multiple mechanisms, including revolving door employment, industry funding of research, and cultural relationships that blur the lines between public health protection and industry promotion. The revolving door between regulatory agencies and the industries they oversee creates obvious conflicts of interest where agency officials may make decisions with an eye toward future employment opportunities, while former industry executives bring commercial perspectives to public health decision-making. This personnel exchange affects agencies from the FDA and CDC to environmental protection agencies, creating systemic bias toward industry-friendly policies and interpretations of scientific evidence. Industry funding of research that informs regulatory decisions has become so pervasive that truly independent safety research is increasingly rare, while studies funded by companies with commercial interests in particular outcomes are more likely to find favorable results than independent research on the same topics. This funding bias affects not only the research that gets conducted, but also how results are interpreted and presented to regulatory agencies and the public. Regulatory science has evolved to rely heavily on industry-provided data and analysis rather than independent research, creating situations where companies essentially regulate themselves by submitting studies designed to support predetermined conclusions. The complexity and expense of conducting safety research creates barriers for independent researchers, while giving industry significant advantages in shaping the evidence base that informs regulatory decisions. Advisory committees that provide scientific guidance to regulatory agencies often include members with financial relationships to the industries affected by their recommendations, creating panels where conflicted experts may outnumber those without commercial interests. While disclosure requirements exist, financial conflicts of interest can still influence decision-making processes, while the pool of available experts may be dominated by those with industry connections. Risk assessment methodologies used by regulatory agencies often rely on assumptions and models that may underestimate health risks while overemphasizing economic costs of regulation. These methodologies frequently fail to account for cumulative effects, vulnerable populations, and long-term consequences, while using statistical approaches that may obscure significant health risks by requiring extremely high levels of evidence before acknowledging harm. Burden of proof standards in many regulatory systems require proof of harm rather than proof of safety, placing the responsibility for demonstrating risks on public health advocates and independent researchers rather than requiring companies to demonstrate the safety of their products before market approval. This approach assumes that new chemicals, technologies, and products are safe until proven otherwise, despite the inability to predict long-term health effects from short-term studies. Trade secret and proprietary information protections allow companies to withhold crucial health and safety information from regulatory agencies and the public, while claiming commercial confidentiality. These protections can prevent independent researchers from evaluating industry claims, while limiting public oversight of regulatory decisions that affect entire populations. International harmonization of regulatory standards often results in adoption of the least protective approaches rather than the most health-protective policies, as economic interests push for standards that facilitate trade rather than optimize public health protection. International trade agreements may override domestic health and safety regulations, while creating pressure to weaken protections that are seen as barriers to commerce. Post-market surveillance systems that are supposed to monitor the safety of approved products are often inadequate and rely primarily on voluntary reporting by the companies that profit from those products. This surveillance typically focuses on identifying obvious acute effects rather than subtle long-term health impacts, while lacking the resources and authority necessary to detect and respond to emerging health problems. Enforcement mechanisms for health and safety regulations are often weak and under-resourced, allowing companies to violate regulations with minimal consequences while creating economic incentives for non-compliance. Penalties for regulatory violations are frequently smaller than the profits generated by non-compliance, while criminal prosecution for health and safety violations remains rare, even when violations result in deaths or serious injuries. Scientific integrity policies that are supposed to protect agency research from political and commercial interference are often inadequate and poorly enforced, while agency scientists may face retaliation for conducting or publishing research that conflicts with industry interests or agency policies. The suppression of inconvenient research findings can prevent regulatory agencies from acting on emerging health threats while maintaining the appearance of scientific objectivity. Public participation in regulatory processes is often limited and ineffective, with lengthy comment periods, technical complexity, and resource requirements that favor well-funded industry participants over public health advocates and affected communities. The formal public participation processes may provide the appearance of democratic input, while actual decision-making remains dominated by industry influence and agency discretion. Agency culture and mission drift can transform health protection agencies into industry promotion organizations over time, as personnel, funding, and political pressures shift agency priorities away from health protection toward economic promotion. This cultural transformation can occur gradually and may not be reflected in official agency missions, while fundamentally altering how agencies approach their regulatory responsibilities. Lobbying and political pressure from regulated industries can influence agency priorities, funding, and personnel decisions, while creating environments where agency officials may be reluctant to take actions that could generate political controversy or industry opposition. The political appointees who lead regulatory agencies may prioritize political considerations over scientific evidence, while career staff may learn to avoid actions that could create political problems for their agencies. Understanding how regulatory capture affects public health protection is crucial for evaluating the reliability of government health recommendations, while supporting reforms that could restore agency independence and effectiveness. This awareness can inform individual health decisions, while supporting advocacy for stronger regulatory protections and more transparent decision-making processes that prioritize public health over commercial interests. Chapter 3: The Suppression of Preventive Medicine and Natural Health. The medical establishment has systematically marginalized preventive approaches and natural health modalities that could address the root causes of many health problems, instead promoting pharmaceutical and procedural interventions that generate revenue while often providing limited benefits for long-term health outcomes. This suppression occurs through medical education, licensing requirements, insurance coverage limitations, and cultural biases that prioritize high-tech interventions over fundamental approaches to health promotion and disease prevention. Nutritional medicine receives minimal attention in medical education, despite extensive research demonstrating the crucial role of nutrition in preventing and treating chronic diseases, while physicians graduate with little knowledge of how dietary interventions can address health problems that are routinely treated with medications. Medical schools typically provide only a few hours of nutrition education throughout their entire curriculum, leaving doctors unprepared to counsel patients about dietary approaches that might prevent or reverse chronic diseases. Lifestyle medicine approaches that emphasize exercise, stress management, sleep optimization, and other non-pharmaceutical interventions are marginalized in medical practice, despite strong evidence for their effectiveness in preventing and treating many chronic conditions. These approaches receive limited insurance coverage, while requiring time and effort that are not well compensated under current healthcare payment systems that favor procedures and prescriptions over counseling and education. Environmental medicine that addresses the health effects of chemical exposures, electromagnetic fields, and other environmental factors is largely ignored or dismissed by mainstream medicine, despite growing evidence that environmental factors play crucial roles in many chronic diseases. Physicians who practice environmental medicine may face skepticism or hostility from colleagues, while patients with environmentally related illnesses often struggle to find appropriate medical care. Functional medicine approaches that focus on identifying and addressing the underlying causes of disease, rather than just treating symptoms, are often dismissed as unscientific despite growing research support for their effectiveness. Functional medicine practitioners may face regulatory challenges, while insurance coverage for functional medicine approaches is often limited or non-existent. Integrative medicine that combines conventional medical approaches with evidence-based complementary therapies faces institutional barriers and professional skepticism, while being relegated to specialized centers rather than being incorporated into routine medical care. The integration of effective complementary approaches into mainstream medicine is often slow and incomplete, while maintaining artificial boundaries between different healing modalities. Herbal medicine and botanical therapies that have been used safely and effectively for thousands of years are often dismissed as unproven or dangerous, while pharmaceutical drugs with more severe side effects are readily prescribed. The regulatory framework that governs herbal products as dietary supplements rather than medicines limits health claims, while requiring no evidence of efficacy for pharmaceutical drugs that may be less safe and effective than botanical alternatives. Mind-body medicine approaches including meditation, yoga, Tai Chi, and other practices that address the psychological components of physical health receive limited attention in medical training and practice despite substantial research supporting their effectiveness for many conditions. These approaches often require time and personal commitment that don't fit well with the quick-fix mentality of pharmaceutical medicine, while generating no revenue for healthcare systems. Detoxification and cleansing approaches that could help the body eliminate accumulated toxins are often dismissed or discouraged by mainstream medicine, while patients with chemical sensitivities or toxic exposures may struggle to find appropriate medical support. The medical establishment often denies the existence of conditions like multiple chemical sensitivity, while providing little guidance for people who believe they have been harmed by environmental exposures. Vitamin and mineral supplementation for addressing nutrient deficiencies and optimizing health is often discouraged by medical professionals who claim that supplements are unnecessary or potentially harmful, while ignoring evidence of widespread nutrient deficiencies and the health benefits of optimal nutrient status. The bias against nutritional supplementation may reflect pharmaceutical industry influence and medical education that emphasizes drug treatment over nutritional optimization. Traditional medicine systems, including traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, and indigenous healing practices, are often dismissed as unscientific or primitive, despite their sophisticated approaches to health and disease that have been refined over thousands of years. These systems often emphasize prevention and individualized treatment approaches that conflict with the standardized, pharmaceutical-focused approach of modern medicine. Energy medicine and biofield therapies that address subtle energy aspects of health and healing are completely dismissed by mainstream medicine, despite patient reports of benefits and some research suggesting potential mechanisms of action. The materialistic worldview of modern medicine may be unable to accommodate healing modalities that work through non-physical mechanisms, while patients who benefit from these approaches may be dismissed or pathologized. Research bias against natural and preventive approaches occurs through funding priorities that favor pharmaceutical research, while limiting resources for studying natural therapies, dietary interventions, and lifestyle approaches. The inability to patent natural substances reduces commercial incentives for researching their therapeutic potential, while the research methodologies used in pharmaceutical research may not be appropriate for evaluating complex natural interventions. Professional licensing and scope of practice regulations limit which practitioners can provide certain types of health services, while often preventing licensed practitioners from incorporating effective natural therapies into their practice. These regulations may protect established medical interests, while limiting patient access to potentially beneficial treatments that fall outside conventional medical practice. Insurance coverage policies systematically discriminate against preventive and natural health approaches by requiring higher levels of evidence for coverage than are typically required for many conventional medical interventions. This creates financial barriers that limit patient access to preventive approaches, while subsidizing expensive medical treatments that might have been unnecessary with appropriate prevention. Medical education and continuing education programs are heavily influenced by pharmaceutical funding and focus primarily on drug and procedural interventions, while providing minimal training in nutrition, lifestyle medicine, and other preventive approaches. This educational bias creates generations of healthcare providers who are well trained in pharmaceutical interventions, but lack knowledge about fundamental approaches to health promotion and disease prevention. Understanding the suppression of preventive and natural health approaches is crucial for making informed decisions about healthcare options, while supporting access to the full range of potentially beneficial treatments. This awareness can help patients seek appropriate care from qualified practitioners, while supporting policies that promote integration of effective preventive and natural therapies into mainstream healthcare. Chapter 4: The Environmental Health Crisis Hidden in Plain Sight. Environmental factors that profoundly affect public health receive minimal attention from health authorities and medical professionals, despite creating population-wide exposures to chemicals, radiation, and other hazards that contribute to chronic diseases, developmental problems, and reduced life expectancy. This environmental health crisis operates largely outside public awareness, while its effects are often misattributed to genetic factors, lifestyle choices, or natural disease processes rather than recognized as preventable consequences of environmental contamination. Chemical contamination of air, water, soil, and food has reached unprecedented levels through industrial pollution, agricultural chemicals, consumer products, and waste disposal practices that expose entire populations to thousands of synthetic chemicals that never existed in human environments before the 20th century. Many of these chemicals can disrupt endocrine systems, damage DNA, impair immune function, and affect neurological development in ways that contribute to cancer, reproductive problems, autoimmune diseases, and other chronic health conditions. Air pollution from vehicle emissions, industrial sources, and particulate matter causes millions of premature deaths annually, while contributing to heart disease, stroke, lung cancer, asthma, and other respiratory and cardiovascular problems. The health effects of air pollution extend beyond obvious respiratory impacts to include cardiovascular disease, diabetes, dementia, and even mental health problems, while prenatal exposure can affect fetal development and increase lifelong disease risks. Water contamination from industrial chemicals, agricultural runoff, pharmaceutical residues, and inadequate water treatment exposes populations to a complex mixture of potentially harmful substances through drinking water, food irrigation, and recreational water contact. Many water contaminants are not regulated or monitored, while treatment systems may not remove all contaminants, creating ongoing exposure to chemicals that can accumulate in the body over time. Pesticide exposure from agricultural use, household pest control, and contaminated food affects virtually everyone in developed countries while creating particular risks for farm workers, children, and people living in agricultural areas. Many pesticides are neurotoxins that can affect brain development and function, while others are endocrine disruptors that can interfere with hormone systems at very low exposure levels. Heavy metals including lead, mercury, cadmium, and arsenic contaminate air, water, and food through industrial pollution, fossil fuel combustion, and consumer products while causing neurological damage, cardiovascular disease, kidney problems, and cancer. These metals can accumulate in the body over time, while causing particular harm to developing brains and reproductive systems. Electromagnetic field exposure from power lines, wireless devices, cell towers, and smart meters has increased exponentially over the past few decades while creating unprecedented human exposure to artificial electromagnetic radiation. While the health effects remain controversial, some research suggests associations with cancer, neurological problems, and reproductive health issues, while sensitive individuals may experience immediate symptoms from electromagnetic field exposure. Noise pollution from traffic, aircraft, industrial sources, and urban environments can cause sleep disruption, cardiovascular problems, cognitive impairment, and stress-related health effects while reducing quality of life in urban and suburban areas. Chronic noise exposure has been linked to increased risk of heart disease, stroke, and mental health problems, while particularly affecting children's learning and development. Endocrine-disrupting chemicals including plastics, flame retardants, pesticides, and personal care product ingredients can interfere with hormone systems at very low exposure levels while affecting reproduction, development, and metabolic function. These chemicals are ubiquitous in modern environments and can have effects across generations through epigenetic mechanisms that alter gene expression without changing DNA sequences. Per- and polyfluoroalkyl substances, PFAS, used in non-stick cookware, waterproof fabrics, food packaging, and firefighting foam have contaminated water supplies and food chains worldwide while persisting in the environment and human body for decades. These forever chemicals have been linked to cancer, liver damage, immune system suppression, and other serious health problems, while their widespread use has created global contamination that may persist for centuries. Indoor air pollution from household products, building materials, and consumer goods often exceeds outdoor pollution levels while creating chronic exposure to volatile organic compounds, formaldehyde, flame retardants, and other chemicals that can affect respiratory health, neurological function, and overall well-being. Modern energy-efficient buildings may trap indoor pollutants, while increasing exposure to chemicals emitted by furnishings and consumer products. Climate change impacts on health include extreme heat events, air quality deterioration, infectious disease expansion, food and water security threats, and mental health effects from climate-related disasters and displacement. These health impacts disproportionately affect vulnerable populations, while creating additional burdens on healthcare systems that are already struggling to address existing health problems. Occupational and environmental justice issues result in disproportionate environmental health burdens for low-income communities and communities of color, who are more likely to live near industrial facilities, have limited access to healthy environments, and lack resources to protect themselves from environmental hazards. These disparities contribute to health inequities, while demonstrating how environmental factors interact with social determinants of health. Agricultural and food system contamination affects food safety and nutritional quality through pesticide residues, antibiotic-resistant bacteria, heavy metals, and processing chemicals, while industrial agriculture practices may reduce the nutritional density of foods and contribute to environmental contamination that affects broader populations beyond direct consumers. Radioactive contamination from nuclear weapons testing, nuclear accidents, medical procedures, and natural sources creates ongoing exposure to ionizing radiation that can cause cancer and other health problems, while radioactive waste storage and disposal create long-term environmental health threats that may persist for thousands of years. Waste and pollution from electronic devices, plastics, and other consumer products create environmental contamination and resource depletion, while contributing to health problems through toxic chemical releases and microplastic contamination of food and water supplies. The rapid turnover of electronic devices and planned obsolescence create waste streams that often end up in developing countries where they create serious health hazards for workers and communities. Understanding the scope and impact of environmental health threats is crucial for protecting individual and family health, while supporting policies and practices that address environmental contamination at its sources. This awareness can inform personal choices about exposure reduction, while supporting collective action to address the environmental causes of chronic disease and health disparities. Chapter 5: Reclaiming Public Health Through Informed Action. Addressing the hidden crises in public health requires comprehensive approaches that combine individual protection strategies with collective action to reform institutions, policies, and systems that currently prioritize commercial interests over genuine health protection. This transformation involves both personal health optimization and advocacy for systemic changes that address the root causes of widespread health problems rather than simply treating their symptoms. Individual health protection begins with understanding the multiple factors that affect health, while developing personal strategies for reducing harmful exposures and optimizing the conditions that support wellness. This includes environmental health protection, nutritional optimization, stress management, and conscious healthcare decision-making that prioritizes prevention over treatment while maintaining appropriate use of beneficial medical interventions. Environmental exposure reduction involves identifying and minimizing contact with chemicals, electromagnetic fields, and other environmental hazards through informed choices about household products, food, water, housing, and occupational exposures. This includes using air and water filtration systems, choosing organic foods when possible, reducing use of synthetic chemicals, and creating living environments that support rather than undermine health. Nutritional optimization focuses on consuming nutrient-dense whole foods while avoiding processed foods that contain additives, preservatives, and other chemicals that may contribute to chronic disease. This approach emphasizes organic produce, grass-fed and pasture-raised animal products, traditional food preparation methods, and nutritional supplementation when appropriate to address deficiencies or optimize health status. Healthcare decision-making involves becoming an informed healthcare consumer who can evaluate medical recommendations critically while making decisions that align with personal values and health goals. This includes understanding the benefits and risks of medical interventions, seeking second opinions when appropriate, and integrating conventional and alternative approaches that serve individual health needs. Stress management and mental health protection require developing resilience against the psychological pressures of modern life, while building social connections and support systems that provide meaning and purpose. This includes mindfulness practices, regular exercise, time in nature, and community engagement that support psychological well-being while reducing vulnerability to mental health problems. Community building and social action create networks of support and influence that can address both individual health needs and collective challenges that affect entire populations. This includes participating in local organizations, supporting community health initiatives, and building relationships with neighbors and community members who share concerns about health and environmental issues. Policy advocacy and political engagement provide opportunities to influence the decisions that affect public health while supporting candidates and policies that prioritize health protection over commercial interests. This includes supporting environmental protection, healthcare reform, food system improvements, and other policies that address the social and environmental determinants of health. Healthcare system reform advocacy focuses on promoting changes that prioritize prevention over treatment, patient welfare over profit, and evidence-based medicine over industry influence. This includes supporting universal healthcare access, integrative medicine, environmental health recognition, and reforms that reduce conflicts of interest in medical research and regulation. Educational initiatives that promote health literacy and environmental awareness can help communities understand the factors that affect their health while building capacity for informed decision-making and collective action. This includes supporting comprehensive health education, environmental health training, and public awareness campaigns that highlight hidden health threats and protection strategies. Regulatory reform efforts aim to restore independence and effectiveness to health protection agencies, while requiring more rigorous safety testing and post-market surveillance for chemicals, products, and technologies that affect public health. This includes supporting stronger chemical regulations, pharmaceutical safety reforms, and environmental protection measures that prioritize precaution over commercial interests. Economic and financial strategies can redirect personal and collective resources away from industries that profit from illness toward those that promote genuine health and sustainability. This includes conscious consumer choices, investment decisions, and support for businesses and organizations that prioritize health and environmental protection over short-term profits. Alternative systems development involves creating parallel institutions and networks that provide healthier alternatives to existing systems, while demonstrating viable approaches to health protection and promotion. This includes supporting organic agriculture, alternative medicine, community health initiatives, and other systems that prioritize health outcomes over commercial interests. Legal action and accountability efforts can hold corporations and institutions responsible for health harms, while creating deterrent effects that discourage future harmful behavior. This includes supporting lawsuits against companies that have caused environmental contamination or health damage, while advocating for stronger legal protections and enforcement mechanisms. Research and information sharing initiatives support independent research on health and environmental issues, while creating networks for sharing information and resources that may not be available through conventional channels. This includes supporting independent researchers, participating in citizen science projects, and creating information networks that prioritize truth over commercial interests. International cooperation and solidarity recognize that many health and environmental challenges cross national boundaries, while requiring coordinated responses that prioritize global health over narrow economic interests. This includes supporting international health and environmental agreements, while building relationships with health advocates and organizations in other countries. Technology and innovation that genuinely serves health and environmental protection can provide tools and solutions for addressing public health challenges, while avoiding technologies that create new risks or serve primarily commercial rather than health interests. This includes supporting development of clean technologies, sustainable practices, and innovations that address root causes of health problems. Future planning and preparedness involve anticipating emerging health threats, while building resilience against known and unknown challenges that may affect individuals and communities. This includes developing skills and resources for health protection, creating support networks for mutual aid, and preparing for potential disruptions to conventional health and social systems. Understanding that reclaiming public health requires both individual action and collective transformation can inform comprehensive approaches that address immediate health needs while working toward systemic changes that could prevent many health problems at their sources. This approach recognizes that personal health is interconnected with community and environmental health, while empowering individuals to take meaningful action for themselves and their communities, despite the limitations of current systems and institutions.
Chapter 1. The Mathematics of Inequality. The concentration of wealth in modern economies has reached levels that most people find difficult to comprehend, not merely because the numbers are large, but because the mathematical relationships that govern wealth accumulation create exponential divergences between those who own significant assets and those who depend primarily on wages for their income. Understanding the true scope of wealth concentration requires examining not just the headline statistics about billionaires and millionaires, but the underlying mathematical principles that make extreme wealth concentration almost inevitable under current economic structures. The compound interest effect that drives wealth accumulation operates according to mathematical principles that create exponential growth for those with sufficient capital to invest, while the same principles work in reverse for those who must borrow money or who cannot accumulate significant assets. A person with $1 million invested at a modest return rate generates more passive income annually than many full-time workers earn from their labor. And this passive income can be reinvested to generate even larger returns in subsequent years. Meanwhile, those without significant assets cannot access these wealth-building mechanisms and may actually lose ground financially due to inflation, debt service costs, and the high cost of being poor. The statistical distributions that characterize wealth holdings reveal power law relationships where a tiny fraction of the population controls a disproportionate share of total wealth, and these distributions have become increasingly skewed over recent decades. The top 1% of wealth holders now control more wealth than the bottom 50% of the population combined in many developed countries, while the top 0.1% control more wealth than the entire bottom 90%. These statistical relationships are not random fluctuations, but reflect systematic forces that concentrate wealth among those who already possess it. The velocity of wealth concentration has accelerated dramatically in recent decades as globalization, technological change, and policy modifications have created new opportunities for wealth accumulation, while also reducing the barriers that previously limited extreme wealth concentration. The creation of new billionaires has accelerated, while the wealth held by existing billionaires has grown at rates that far exceed economic growth, wage increases, or inflation. This acceleration suggests that wealth concentration is not approaching any natural equilibrium, but is continuing to increase at rates that could eventually concentrate most economic assets among a tiny elite. The intergenerational transmission of wealth through inheritance and family privilege creates dynastic accumulations that persist across multiple generations, while also providing advantages that compound over time through access to elite educational institutions, social networks, and investment opportunities. The mathematical effect of inherited wealth is not merely additive, but multiplicative, as each generation receives not only financial assets, but also the cultural capital, social connections, and institutional access that enable continued wealth accumulation. This creates permanent class structures that are resistant to social mobility, regardless of individual merit or effort. The asset price inflation that has characterized recent decades has primarily benefited those who already owned appreciating assets like real estate, stocks, and businesses, while creating barriers for those seeking to acquire these wealth-building assets for the first time. The mathematical relationship between asset prices and wages has shifted dramatically, with housing prices, stock valuations, and business valuations increasing much faster than median wages. This divergence means that each generation faces higher barriers to asset ownership than the previous generation, creating a permanent renter class that cannot access traditional wealth-building mechanisms. The leverage and financial engineering capabilities available to wealthy individuals and institutions allow them to amplify their returns while also shifting risks to others, creating mathematical advantages that are not available to ordinary investors or workers. Wealthy individuals can borrow money at low interest rates using their existing assets as collateral, allowing them to acquire additional income-producing assets while deducting the interest costs from their taxable income. These leverage strategies can multiply returns while also providing tax advantages that further increase after-tax wealth accumulation. The global arbitrage opportunities that are available to holders of large amounts of capital allow them to optimize their investments, tax obligations, and regulatory compliance across multiple jurisdictions in ways that can dramatically increase returns while reducing costs and risks. Wealthy individuals and corporations can move assets to jurisdictions with favorable tax treatment, invest in markets with higher returns, and structure their affairs to minimize regulatory compliance costs. These global optimization strategies are not available to ordinary workers whose income is tied to specific geographic locations and who lack the resources to maintain complex international financial structures. The ownership concentration in major corporations and financial institutions creates additional mathematical advantages for large wealth holders who can exercise control over economic decisions that affect entire industries and markets. When a small number of individuals or institutions control major corporations, they can make decisions that benefit their other investments while also receiving compensation and benefits that far exceed what would be available through salary employment. This concentration of corporate control creates opportunities for coordinated decision-making that can manipulate markets and create additional wealth accumulation opportunities. The network effects and relationship advantages that come with extreme wealth create mathematical multipliers that increase the value of wealth beyond its simple purchasing power. Wealthy individuals gain access to investment opportunities, business partnerships, and information networks that are not available through public markets or standard channels. These network effects can provide early access to promising investments, insider information about market conditions, and partnership opportunities that generate returns far above market averages. The tax optimization and legal structure advantages available to holders of significant wealth allow them to retain a much higher percentage of their investment returns than ordinary investors or workers can retain from their income. Sophisticated tax planning strategies, legal entity structures, and timing optimization can reduce effective tax rates on investment income to levels far below the tax rates paid by wage earners. These tax advantages are cumulative and compound over time, creating significant mathematical advantages for wealth accumulation. The political influence and regulatory capture capabilities that come with extreme wealth allow wealthy individuals and institutions to shape the rules of economic competition in ways that protect and enhance their wealth accumulation while creating barriers for potential competitors. Campaign contributions, lobbying expenditures, and other forms of political influence can generate enormous returns by creating favorable regulatory environments, tax policies, and government spending decisions. The ability to influence the rules of the game creates mathematical advantages that go far beyond simple market competition. The economic rent extraction opportunities that are available to holders of scarce assets allow them to generate income streams that are not dependent on productive economic activity, but rather on their control of limited resources or market positions. Ownership of land in desirable locations, control of intellectual property, or market monopolies can generate continuing income streams without requiring ongoing investment or innovation. These rent-seeking opportunities create mathematical advantages that compound over time, while also reducing economic efficiency and innovation. Chapter 2: The Ownership Society. The concentration of productive assets in the hands of a small elite has created an ownership structure where the vast majority of people work for organizations they do not own, use technologies they do not control, and live in housing they do not possess, while a tiny fraction of the population owns the capital assets that generate most economic returns. This ownership concentration represents a fundamental transformation from earlier economic arrangements and creates power relationships that extend far beyond simple wealth differences to encompass control over economic opportunities, working conditions, and social development. The corporate ownership patterns that characterize modern economies reveal how a small number of institutional investors and wealthy families control major corporations through shareholding arrangements that give them voting power over corporate decisions, while most employees and consumers have no voice in how these organizations operate. The concentration of corporate ownership among pension funds, investment companies, and sovereign wealth funds means that ultimate control over major corporations often rests with fund managers who may prioritize financial returns over worker welfare, environmental protection, or community development. This ownership structure creates systematic biases toward short-term profit maximization at the expense of other stakeholder interests. The financial institution control that wealthy individuals and organizations exercise over banks, investment companies, and insurance companies gives them influence over credit allocation, investment flows, and financial market conditions that can affect entire economies. When major financial institutions are controlled by a small number of shareholders, their lending decisions, investment strategies, and risk management practices can be coordinated in ways that serve the interests of large wealth holders while potentially disadvantaging smaller businesses and individual borrowers. This financial control creates opportunities for the wealthy to direct capital flows in ways that benefit their other investments and business interests. The real estate and land ownership concentration that has occurred in many urban areas and valuable rural regions has created situations where a small number of property owners control the spaces where most people live and work, while extracting substantial economic rents from these essential resources. Large-scale property ownership allows wealthy individuals and institutions to benefit from rising property values, while also controlling the supply of housing and commercial space in ways that can artificially inflate prices. This land ownership concentration creates permanent income streams for property owners, while imposing ongoing costs on renters and businesses that must pay to access these essential resources. The intellectual property and technology ownership that characterizes the digital economy gives a small number of companies and individuals control over the platforms, algorithms, and data systems that increasingly mediate economic activity and social interaction. The ownership of patents, copyrights, trademarks, and trade secrets creates monopolistic advantages that allow technology companies to extract economic rents from users and competitors, while also controlling innovation directions and market development. This intellectual property concentration creates barriers to competition, while also giving technology owners influence over information flows and communication systems. The natural resource and commodity ownership that affects essential inputs for economic production gives wealthy individuals and corporations control over energy supplies, mineral deposits, agricultural land, and water resources that are necessary for all economic activity. The concentration of natural resource ownership allows these owners to influence prices and availability of essential commodities, while also capturing the economic rents generated by resource scarcity. This resource ownership concentration creates vulnerabilities for economies that depend on these inputs, while also providing owners with leverage over government policies and economic development strategies. The infrastructure and utility ownership that affects transportation, communication, and energy systems gives private owners control over essential services that were often previously provided by government agencies or regulated public utilities. The privatization of highways, airports, telecommunications networks, and energy systems has transferred control over essential infrastructure to private owners who can extract profits from users, while also making investment and maintenance decisions based on profit considerations rather than public need. This infrastructure ownership concentration creates opportunities for private profit extraction from essential public services. The media and entertainment ownership that affects information flows and cultural production has become concentrated among a small number of large corporations that can influence public opinion, political discourse, and cultural values through their control over newspapers, television networks, social media platforms, and entertainment content. This media ownership concentration allows wealthy owners to shape public narratives about economic and political issues, while also creating barriers for alternative viewpoints and independent journalism. The influence over information and culture that comes with media ownership creates power that extends far beyond economic control. The pharmaceutical and healthcare ownership that affects medical research, drug development, and healthcare delivery gives private owners control over essential health services while also allowing them to extract profits from human health needs. The concentration of pharmaceutical ownership among large corporations creates incentives to focus research and development on profitable treatments rather than public health priorities, while also allowing these companies to charge high prices for essential medications. This healthcare ownership concentration creates conflicts between profit maximization and public health, while also giving private owners influence over medical research priorities. The agricultural and food system ownership that affects food production, processing, and distribution has become concentrated among large agribusiness corporations that control everything from seed production to retail distribution. This concentration gives a small number of companies influence over food prices, farming practices, and nutrition outcomes, while also creating dependencies for farmers and consumers who must work within corporate-controlled food systems. The agricultural ownership concentration affects food security and environmental sustainability, while also allowing corporate owners to extract profits from essential human needs. The transportation and logistics ownership that affects how goods and people move through the economy gives private owners control over shipping, trucking, airlines, and delivery systems that are essential for economic functioning. The concentration of transportation ownership allows these companies to influence shipping costs, service availability, and route development, while also creating barriers for competitors and alternative transportation systems. This transportation ownership concentration affects economic competitiveness and environmental sustainability, while also providing owners with leverage over supply chain management. The financial infrastructure ownership that affects payment systems, credit networks, and financial data management gives private companies control over the essential systems that enable economic transactions and financial planning. The ownership of credit card networks, payment processing systems, and financial data companies allows these owners to extract fees from every economic transaction while also gaining access to detailed information about economic activity. This financial infrastructure ownership creates opportunities for rent extraction, while also giving owners influence over economic behavior and market development. The educational institution ownership and control that affects human capital development and credentialing systems gives wealthy individuals and organizations influence over educational content, research priorities, and career pathway development. The concentration of educational ownership among elite institutions and private education companies creates advantages for those who can afford expensive education, while also allowing owners to shape research agendas and educational content to serve their interests. This educational ownership concentration affects social mobility and intellectual development, while also creating barriers for alternative educational approaches and democratic knowledge creation. Chapter 3: The Market Manipulation. The ability of extremely wealthy individuals and institutions to influence market conditions, manipulate prices, and create artificial scarcity gives them power to generate profits through market manipulation rather than productive economic activity. While these manipulative practices often remain legal or are difficult to detect and prosecute, understanding how market manipulation operates reveals how concentrated wealth can be used to extract additional wealth from market participants who lack the resources and information needed to compete effectively against sophisticated manipulation strategies. The high-frequency trading and algorithmic manipulation that characterizes modern financial markets allows wealthy institutions to use advanced technology and mathematical models to extract profits from other market participants through speed advantages and information processing capabilities that are not available to ordinary investors. These trading strategies can manipulate stock prices, currency exchange rates, and commodity prices through coordinated buying and selling activities that create artificial price movements. The profits generated through these manipulation strategies come at the expense of other market participants, while potentially distorting price signals that are supposed to reflect genuine supply and demand conditions. The merger and acquisition strategies that large corporations use to eliminate competition and consolidate market control allow wealthy owners to create monopolistic advantages that enable price manipulation and rent extraction from consumers and suppliers. When major corporations acquire their competitors, they can reduce competition, eliminate innovative alternatives, and coordinate pricing strategies that extract higher profits from markets that would otherwise be competitive. These consolidation strategies often receive government approval, despite their anti-competitive effects, because of the political influence that large corporations can exercise over regulatory agencies. The commodity market manipulation that affects essential resources like energy, food, and raw materials allows wealthy traders and corporations to influence prices through hoarding, speculation, and coordinated trading activities that can create artificial scarcity and price volatility. Large financial institutions and commodity trading companies can use their market power to influence prices for oil, agricultural products, and other essential commodities in ways that generate enormous profits while imposing costs on consumers and businesses that depend on these resources. These manipulation strategies can affect global food security and energy availability while generating profits for market manipulators. The currency manipulation and foreign exchange market interventions that wealthy institutions and sovereign wealth funds can conduct allow them to influence exchange rates and international capital flows in ways that can affect entire national economies. Large-scale currency trading and coordinated intervention activities can create artificial currency movements that benefit certain investors, while imposing costs on countries and individuals who are affected by exchange rate volatility. These currency manipulation strategies can undermine monetary policy effectiveness, while also creating opportunities for speculative profits at the expense of economic stability. The real estate market manipulation that occurs in major metropolitan areas allows wealthy investors to influence property prices through coordinated buying activities, artificial scarcity creation, and speculation that can drive housing costs beyond the reach of ordinary residents. Large-scale property investment and development activities can create property bubbles while also displacing existing residents and businesses that cannot afford artificially inflated prices. These real estate manipulation strategies generate profits for property investors while creating housing affordability crises and community displacement. The information and media manipulation that wealthy individuals and organizations can conduct through their ownership of media companies and their influence over information platforms allows them to shape public opinion and market sentiment in ways that benefit their investment positions. Coordinated media campaigns, selective information disclosure, and narrative manipulation can influence consumer behavior, investor sentiment, and political decisions in ways that create market opportunities for those who control information flows. These information manipulation strategies can distort democratic decision-making, while also creating unfair advantages in market competition. The regulatory capture and policy manipulation that wealthy interests can achieve through campaign contributions, lobbying activities, and revolving door employment allows them to shape government policies in ways that create market advantages and eliminate regulatory constraints on their activities. When wealthy interests can influence the development and enforcement of market regulations, they can create rules that benefit their business interests while imposing barriers on competitors and alternative approaches. This regulatory manipulation allows wealthy interests to use government power to create and maintain market advantages that would not be sustainable in genuinely competitive markets. The supply chain and distribution control that large corporations exercise over essential goods and services allows them to manipulate availability and pricing through coordinated supply management and distribution strategies. When a small number of companies control major supply chains, they can create artificial scarcity, coordinate pricing strategies, and eliminate alternative suppliers in ways that extract higher profits from consumers and businesses. These supply chain manipulation strategies can affect essential goods like food, medicine, and energy, while creating dependencies that benefit corporate controllers. The technology platform manipulation that major technology companies can conduct through their control over digital markets, search algorithms, and communication platforms allows them to influence which businesses succeed and which fail, while also extracting profits from platform participants. Technology platforms can manipulate search results, advertising placement, and user interface design in ways that benefit certain businesses while disadvantaging others. These platform manipulation strategies create opportunities for rent extraction, while also giving platform owners influence over entire economic sectors. The credit and financing manipulation that major financial institutions can conduct through their control over lending standards, interest rates, and credit availability allows them to influence which businesses and individuals can access capital, while also extracting profits through interest rate manipulation and fee structures. When large financial institutions coordinate their lending activities, they can create artificial credit scarcity or abundance that affects entire markets, while also generating profits through interest rate spreads and financial service fees. These credit manipulation strategies can affect economic growth and development, while creating advantages for those who control access to capital. The intellectual property and patent manipulation that technology and pharmaceutical companies use to create artificial monopolies allows them to extract profits through legal monopolies that prevent competition and innovation. Patent trolling, defensive patent portfolioing, and strategic patent litigation can be used to eliminate competitors and extract licensing fees from innovative companies. These intellectual property manipulation strategies can stifle innovation while creating rent extraction opportunities for those who control large patent portfolios. The derivatives and financial instrument manipulation that sophisticated financial institutions can conduct through complex financial products allows them to transfer risks to other market participants while extracting profits through fees and trading advantages. The creation and trading of derivatives, structured products, and other complex financial instruments can be used to manipulate risk pricing and transfer potential losses to less sophisticated market participants. These financial manipulation strategies can create systemic risks while generating profits for institutions that understand and control these complex markets. Chapter 4: The Political Machinery. The translation of economic power into political influence operates through sophisticated systems of campaign financing, lobbying, policy development, and regulatory capture that allow wealthy individuals and corporations to shape government decisions in ways that protect and enhance their economic interests, while often remaining largely invisible to ordinary citizens. Understanding how this political machinery operates reveals how concentrated wealth can effectively purchase government policies and regulatory decisions that further concentrate wealth and power among those who already possess it. The campaign finance system that funds modern political campaigns has evolved into a complex ecosystem where wealthy donors can exercise disproportionate influence over candidate selection, policy development, and electoral outcomes through direct contributions, independent expenditures, and support for political organizations that are nominally independent but effectively controlled by major donors. The unlimited spending permitted through super PACs and dark money organizations allows wealthy interests to spend vast sums on political influence, while often concealing their identities from voters who might be concerned about the sources of campaign funding. This campaign finance system creates dependencies between elected officials and wealthy donors that can influence policy decisions long after elections are completed. The lobbying industry that has grown around government decision-making represents a massive investment by wealthy interests in influencing policy outcomes through professional advocates who possess detailed knowledge of government processes, personal relationships with government officials, and resources that far exceed what is available to ordinary citizens or public interest groups. Professional lobbyists often earn enormous fees for their influence activities, while also maintaining the revolving door relationships with government agencies that provide them with inside knowledge and access. The scale of lobbying expenditures by wealthy interests creates systematic advantages in policy development that can overwhelm democratic input from ordinary citizens. The think tank and policy development industry that provides intellectual justification for policies favored by wealthy interests operates through nominally independent research organizations that are often funded by wealthy donors with specific policy agendas. These think tanks can produce academic-appearing research that supports predetermined policy conclusions, while their funding sources and ideological orientations may not be apparent to policymakers or media outlets that cite their work. The investment in policy research and development by wealthy interests allows them to shape the intellectual framework within which policy debates occur, while also providing credible-seeming justification for policies that serve their economic interests. The regulatory capture processes through which wealthy interests gain control over the government agencies that are supposed to regulate their activities represent one of the most important but least visible aspects of political influence. Regulatory capture can occur through the revolving door between agencies and regulated industries, through industry funding of agency activities, and through political pressure on agency leadership from elected officials who are influenced by industry interests. When regulatory agencies are captured by the industries they regulate, they may prioritize industry interests over public welfare, while maintaining the appearance of independent oversight and protection. The judicial influence strategies that wealthy interests use to shape court decisions and legal precedents include funding judicial campaigns, supporting legal organizations that train judges and develop legal theories, and pursuing strategic litigation that can establish favorable legal precedents. The lifetime tenure of federal judges makes judicial influence a long-term investment strategy that can pay dividends for decades after initial investments are made. The influence over legal interpretation and precedent development allows wealthy interests to shape the legal framework within which economic activity occurs, while also limiting the effectiveness of regulations and oversight. The media influence and narrative control that wealthy individuals and organizations exercise through ownership of media companies and relationships with journalists allows them to shape public opinion and political discourse in ways that support their policy preferences while often concealing their influence over information flows. Media ownership concentration allows wealthy owners to influence editorial policies and news coverage, while also providing platforms for policy advocates who support their interests. The dependence of journalists on access to powerful sources creates additional opportunities for wealthy interests to influence media coverage through their control over information access. The international policy influence that multinational corporations and wealthy individuals can exercise across multiple jurisdictions allows them to coordinate policy advocacy across different countries, while also using international agreements and organizations to advance their interests. Trade agreements, international regulatory coordination, and global economic governance structures can be influenced by wealthy interests in ways that create favorable conditions for their business activities, while limiting the ability of individual governments to regulate their activities. This international policy influence can undermine democratic sovereignty, while creating regulatory arbitrage opportunities for multinational organizations. The grassroots manipulation and astroturf organizing that wealthy interests fund to create artificial appearances of popular support for their policy preferences allows them to manufacture public pressure for policies that may not actually have broad public support. Professional organizing, social media manipulation, and coordinated advocacy campaigns can create the impression of grassroots movements while actually being funded and controlled by wealthy interests with specific policy agendas. These astroturf activities can distort democratic decision-making by creating false impressions about public opinion and citizen preferences. The academic and educational influence that wealthy donors exercise through university funding, research sponsorship, and educational foundation activities allows them to shape research agendas, educational content, and intellectual development in ways that support their long-term interests. University donations with strings attached, research funding with predetermined conclusions, and educational programs that promote particular economic theories can influence the development of knowledge and expertise in ways that serve wealthy interests. This academic influence can affect the training of future policymakers and opinion leaders, while also shaping public understanding of economic and political issues. The electoral system manipulation that wealthy interests can conduct through redistricting influence, voting system advocacy, and election administration involvement allows them to shape the electoral playing field in ways that favor candidates and parties that support their interests. Funding for redistricting efforts, advocacy for particular voting systems, and influence over election administration can affect electoral outcomes in ways that may not be apparent to ordinary voters. These electoral manipulation strategies can reduce the responsiveness of democratic systems to public preferences, while increasing the influence of wealthy interests over government decisions. The bureaucratic and administrative influence that wealthy interests exercise through their relationships with government agencies and administrative officials allows them to influence policy implementation and regulatory enforcement in ways that may be more important than formal policy decisions. Administrative guidance, enforcement priorities, and regulatory interpretation can significantly affect how policies actually work in practice, while often receiving less public attention than formal policy debates. The influence over bureaucratic decision-making allows wealthy interests to shape policy outcomes, even when they cannot directly control formal policy development. The crisis exploitation and emergency powers that wealthy interests can leverage during periods of economic crisis, natural disasters, or other emergencies allows them to advance policy agendas that might not be acceptable during normal political conditions. Economic crises can create opportunities for wealthy interests to acquire assets at below market prices, while also creating political pressure for policies that socialize losses while privatizing gains. The exploitation of crisis conditions allows wealthy interests to advance structural changes that increase their wealth and power, while taking advantage of reduced public attention and democratic oversight. The long-term strategy coordination that wealthy individuals and organizations conduct through foundations, family offices, and other institutional structures allows them to maintain consistent policy advocacy across multiple electoral cycles and policy development periods. Long-term strategic planning can be more effective than short-term political influence because it can shape the intellectual and institutional framework within which policy debates occur, while also building relationships and influence networks that persist across different political administrations and policy environments. Chapter 5: Breaking the Stranglehold. Addressing the concentration of wealth and economic power requires understanding both the structural changes needed to create more equitable economic systems and the political strategies necessary to overcome the resistance of entrenched wealth interests who benefit from current arrangements. Creating more democratic and sustainable economic systems requires coordinated efforts across multiple domains, including policy reform, institutional change, technological innovation, and cultural transformation that can redirect economic incentives toward broader prosperity rather than wealth concentration. The progressive taxation and wealth redistribution strategies that could significantly reduce wealth concentration include implementing wealth taxes on large fortunes, closing tax loopholes that benefit high-income individuals, strengthening estate taxes to limit intergenerational wealth transfers, and creating more progressive income tax systems that ensure wealthy individuals pay their fair share of public expenses. These taxation reforms would need to be coordinated internationally to prevent tax avoidance through jurisdictional shopping, while also being designed to maintain incentives for productive economic activity. The revenues generated from progressive taxation could fund public investments in education, infrastructure, and social programs that create broader economic opportunities. The corporate governance and ownership reforms that could democratize economic decision-making include requiring worker representation on corporate boards, implementing profit-sharing or employee stock ownership plans, creating benefit corporation structures that prioritize stakeholder interests over shareholder returns, and exploring alternative ownership models like worker cooperatives and social enterprises. These ownership reforms could ensure that economic growth translates into broadly shared prosperity, while also giving workers and communities more voice in economic decisions that affect their lives. The development of alternative ownership models could provide practical examples of more democratic economic organization. The financial system reforms that could reduce the concentration of financial power include breaking up too-big-to-fail financial institutions, implementing financial transaction taxes that could slow speculative trading while generating revenue, creating public banking options that could provide affordable financial services to underserved communities, and establishing tighter regulation of derivatives and other complex financial instruments that can create systemic risks. These financial reforms could reduce the ability of large financial institutions to extract rents from the broader economy, while also reducing systemic risks that can lead to economic crises. The antitrust enforcement and competition policy reforms that could reduce market concentration include breaking up monopolistic corporations, preventing mergers that reduce competition, regulating platform companies that have achieved dominant market positions, and creating policies that support small business development and entrepreneurship. Stronger competition policy could reduce the ability of large corporations to extract monopolistic profits, while also creating more opportunities for innovation and entrepreneurship. The enforcement of competition policy would need to address both domestic market concentration and global corporate power. The technology and platform regulation that could reduce the concentration of digital power includes treating major technology platforms as public utilities subject to common carrier obligations, implementing data portability requirements that allow users to move between platforms, creating interoperability standards that prevent platform lock-in, and exploring public alternatives to privately controlled digital infrastructure. Technology regulation could ensure that digital innovation serves broad public interests rather than concentrating power among technology owners, while also protecting privacy and democratic discourse. The labor organizing and worker power strategies that could strengthen worker bargaining power include making it easier for workers to form unions, creating sectoral bargaining systems that cover entire industries, implementing portable benefits that provide security for contingent workers, and strengthening worker protection laws that prevent retaliation against organizing activities. Stronger worker power could ensure that productivity gains translate into wage increases, while also giving workers more voice in workplace decisions that affect their lives and communities. The monetary and financial system alternatives that could reduce the power of private financial institutions include exploring central bank digital currencies that could provide public alternatives to private payment systems, implementing postal banking that could provide basic financial services through public institutions, creating sovereign wealth funds that could provide public ownership of productive assets, and exploring modern monetary theory approaches that could reduce government dependence on private creditors. The international cooperation and coordination strategies that could address global wealth concentration include negotiating international tax cooperation agreements that prevent tax avoidance, creating international institutions that can regulate multinational corporations, implementing global minimum tax rates that prevent tax competition between countries, and developing international labor standards that prevent a race to the bottom in working conditions. International cooperation could prevent wealthy individuals and corporations from using global arbitrage strategies to avoid accountability, while also ensuring that economic development benefits all countries rather than just wealthy nations. The democratic participation and civic engagement reforms that could strengthen democratic control over economic policy include implementing campaign finance reforms that reduce the influence of wealthy donors, creating participatory budgeting systems that give communities direct control over public investments, establishing citizen assemblies that can develop policy recommendations independent of special interest influence, and strengthening voting rights and electoral systems to ensure democratic representation. The education and awareness building strategies that could create public support for economic reform include developing economic literacy programs that help people understand how wealth concentration affects their lives, supporting investigative journalism that exposes wealth concentration and its consequences, creating community education programs that explore alternative economic models, and building cultural narratives that emphasize shared prosperity over individual wealth accumulation. The local and community-based economic development approaches that could create alternatives to concentrated corporate power include supporting local business development, creating community investment funds that keep wealth circulating locally, developing local food systems that reduce dependence on agribusiness, and implementing community land trusts that prevent gentrification and speculation. Local economic development could demonstrate the benefits of more democratic economic organization, while also building political support for broader economic reforms. The measurement and accountability systems that could track progress toward more equitable economic systems include developing comprehensive measures of wealth distribution and economic mobility, conducting regular assessments of corporate power and market concentration, creating transparency requirements that make wealth concentration visible to the public, and establishing independent institutions that can monitor and report on economic inequality trends. The long-term vision and movement-building efforts that could create sustained pressure for economic transformation include developing shared visions of democratic economic systems, building coalitions between different groups that share interests in reducing wealth concentration, creating institutions that can coordinate long-term reform efforts, and developing political strategies that can overcome the resistance of entrenched wealth interests. Building a movement for economic democracy requires understanding that meaningful change will require sustained effort over many years and across multiple domains of policy and institutional reform. The implementation and transition strategies that could manage the shift toward more equitable economic systems include phasing in reforms gradually to allow for economic adjustment, providing support for workers and communities affected by economic transitions, maintaining economic stability during reform periods, and ensuring that reforms create benefits that are visible and meaningful to ordinary people. Successful economic transformation requires careful attention to implementation challenges, while also maintaining momentum for continued reform and improvement.